and welcome to the final Business Support and Digital Overview and Scrutiny Committee's meeting in this municipal year. We have a hectic agenda tonight, so I will welcome a few colleagues as we go through. Apologies for absence. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Williams, and Councillor Etheridge is substituting. We also have apologies from Councillor Annie Machon, and Councillor Mark Prenter is on his way. And we have apologies from Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Steve. Can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 1st of February as correct? Councillor Lawrence.
Chair, I wasn't at that meeting, unfortunately, but I noticed there were two items where the portfolio holder for regeneration was asked to provide some additional information, and there was also a request for information on the low-income tracker. I personally haven't seen that additional information since the meeting, and I'm wondering if the portfolio holder has forgotten and whether the information on the low-income tracker is forthcoming. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Would you like to respond, Steve?
Just to say that the request has been passed on to officers. It hasn't been passed on to me yet, so I haven't passed it to you, but when it's available, I will pass that on.
Can we just make sure the minutes reflect that we haven't had the answers to those questions yet? Because they're not complicated questions. I don't understand what the delay is in providing that information.
They'd be for tonight's minute, wouldn't they, Chair?
Sorry, Councillor Brown.
That would be for tonight's minutes. These minutes are correct as written.
Thank you. Can I sign the records of the meeting? Agreed? Thank you. I have no urgent matters. Are there any declaration of DPI or other interests or any declaration of whipping? That brings us on to agenda item 5. I would like to welcome the portfolio holder for business management, Councillor Van Dyke. I'll ask Councillor Van Dyke if she would like to make any comment in relation to her report prior to questions.
I'll wait for the questions. Thank you.
Members. Councillor Luella Prenter.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Councillor Van Dyke. I've just got a couple of questions regarding the long overdue pay rise that was granted recently, which I'm pleased to see. When are we likely to see the impact of the pay increase on the recruitment and retention? What plans are there going forward to support this in terms of not just pay but other benefits to try and improve on that? Do you want to answer that one? So I was pleased to see the long overdue pay increase. When are we likely, or when are you expecting to see the impact on the recruitment and retention of staff going forward? Because I know that's another bonus for trying to get people in and keep them here, because obviously the pay was a long-term issue. Is there a forecast of when that's likely to show, or is it already happening? Thank you.
I don't think I can give you a forecast of when all of those posts will be filled, but there has been movement, certainly in legal services. A number of posts have been substantively filled, some by going out to recruitment and some by conversion of locums to substantive posts. So, I mean, it's a quite complex landscape, but we're moving in the right direction, most certainly.
Could you please use your microphone, Councillor Prenter?
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I've just, I'm trying to read my notes here, but how are we doing on the locums in terms of numbers? Do you have an idea of how they've come down? I know the report did say that some had gone down, but is there any more improvement on that?
It's significant, but it's ongoing. So there are only a few. There were something like 70% locums, for instance, in legal services when I picked this up. It's much, much less than that now. It's probably half a dozen maximum in legal services. I could be challenged on that, but it's significant anyway.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other member? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions. I'll just try and bunch them together in groups, if that's okay. In 5.2, the pay rise.
Can you speak into your microphone?
Sorry, I've got a cold, Councillor, and my voice is going. 5.2, the pay rise that's been put forward. I'm just wondering, in order to pay for that pay rise, what's your thoughts on increasing productivity? And just following up on Luella's point about retention and recruitment, when do you expect to see some improvements in that area?
Starting with the second bit, there are improvements in recruitment, certainly, but it's not going to be an instant outcome. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Could you ask me the questions one at a time,
Sure,
and then it'll be easier?
So in terms of productivity, so normally you give a pay rise. In order to pay for that pay rise, you'd hope to see some improvements in productivity. Has there been any discussion about productivity improvements at all, or are we just giving the 5% pay rise in the hope that it's going to solve the recruitment and retention problem?
Well, I think it's neither of those things, actually, because, first of all, if we're recruiting new staff, I wouldn't expect to see a huge peak in productivity so quickly anyway. So it is a slower process. In terms of the pay rise, I mean, the cost of living is increasing for people, clearly. So a pay rise, it's not a huge pay rise, 5% cost of living increase. And the alternative to that is we continue to lose more staff than we've already been losing to other organisations. For instance, there are substantial new joiners have left in the last year before the pay rise was awarded. So I do think that we have to wait and see what happens in those terms. But I don't think it's unreasonable to help our staff to survive by giving them a cost of living increase that recognises the rate of inflation.
I don't disagree with you, but the Labour group has had to borrow £15 million.
Sorry, I can't.
The Labour group has had to borrow £15 million to plug next year's budget gap, and the pay rises are £10 million. So there has to be some improvements in productivity in order to pay for those pay rises. It's only a general point. It's not a question, really.
It's a difficult question, isn't it?
Yeah.
But then if we can't recruit to the posts and we end up having to pay for locums for the services that we have to deliver, then we're going to be in an even worse position financially.
Okay. Well, that's not really working in legal, because the round 3 position has got worse by 61,000, despite regrading some of those jobs and converting 70% of staff from locum to 24% to locum. So we're still hemorrhaging money in legal.
It's not going to be an instant process, is it?
I don't know.
Well,
I'm asking the question. Okay, that's fine. In 5.3, you talk about customer contact channel. This is very good, but there's no data. What does very good mean in your eyes?
okay. Well, I think it's about the speed at which those requests are acceded to, isn't it?
Could we have some data to back up the statement?
I don't have that data, but I can provide it to you later.
Okay. 6.14, the discretionary housing payments. We've received 484,000. We've paid out 396. I'm just wondering what we've done with the other 88,000, or is it waiting to...
Sorry, can you clarify that question?
Yeah, 6.14 in your report. Discretionary housing payments. We've received 484,000 for discretionary housing payments, and we've paid out 396,000. I'm just wondering what we've done with the other 88,000.
Again, I don't think that's a question I can answer today, but I will follow that up for you.
Thank you. There appears to be a typo in 6.16. It says over 11,000 M has been distributed to Medway households. I don't think that's the right number. I'm just wondering what the right number is.
You don't think it's the right number?
Well, 11,000 M, is it? 11,000 million. Is it 11 million, do we think?
I don't know what that
Okay.
is. I hadn't noticed that.
Okay, that's no problem.
Sorry, another one to...
6.4.1, this is the 8,000 letters that were issued challenging discounts on council tax. So the really good news is that 1,600 discounts have been cancelled. I'm just wondering what the progress is on the remaining 6,400.
So we're on 6.4.1, yes?
Yeah.
I mean, this is an ongoing process, isn't it?
Yeah,
In terms of collection. And
Yeah.
so when this document was produced, I'm sure there's been movement on those figures since then. But I can't give you a figure as at the current date.
Okay. And just...
Sorry. Kanye, it's a point of information.
This committee was, and audit committee, were given figures around that, about those letters, and officers gave quite detailed information to this committee saying the letters went out and they resulted in over 1,600 cancellations. The others were proper and therefore they didn't need cancellation. And that was given to this committee. If people read the papers or listened to the previous committee, that level of detail was given by officers.
Thank you for your point of information.
Thank you for the clarification. I've got one final question. It's to do with 6.4.4, the 13,600 liability orders that were issued by the council. I totally support the council wanting to recover more of the costs associated with those liability orders. But I'm just wondering what has been the result of issuing those liability orders. How many have subsequently resulted in cash into the council?
Again, I believe that's a question that I will provide, an answer I will provide in writing to you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, Councillor Van Dijk. My questions are around the HR area, and I wanted to talk or question, if I may, Chair, about the general principles rather than necessarily get down into the detail of some of this, which is why we have line managers, of course. But I was interested to see, if I may refer back briefly to a meeting I was at last week, the Regen Culture and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee Chair, where Councillor Lauren Edwards talked about upskilling and the work that adult education, together with the Job Centre service, was doing to increase the skills of the local workforce. Very topical at a time when we look back on 40 years since the closure of the dockyard. My question, Chair, relates to what we're doing for our own people in this respect. Is the general principle of using, for example, adult education accepted in terms of training and retraining our own people? We live in a climate, obviously, of tight budgets. We live in a climate where turnover is much greater, than it used to be in my day at work, and people move on of their own volition to other jobs. And we live in a period where we've got the background of AI and new technology. So with all that background in mind, I wondered if the portfolio holder might want to offer some thoughts on how we might improve the offer for our own people. Is it the case that these services are purely external facing, or do services like adult education get involved with the training of our own people? Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry it was a bit of a long question, but I wanted to give the background. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I think it's fair to say there are plans in train to have those conversations with the staff. It's been more difficult because Gunwharf is only partially open at the moment, so not everybody's coming in to work at the same time. The department is surveying concerns of staff at the moment because people are struggling with the difficulties of not coming into Gunwharf. There's a new staff survey going out in May, and that follows what is a significant change in terms of implementing starting to implement the Medway review, and staff retention has been better, sickness has been high, and turnover has been high, but better than last year. There's about 17% turnover of staff. So those are issues that we need to address in the context of your question.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report, Councillor Van Dyke. A couple of things. Cabs has traditionally always had terrible retention rates, not necessarily because of the job, because it's an entry job into the council, a grade 2. Many of the jobs are grade 2, and then they apply for internal jobs inside the council and move on. So I'd wonder, what is the retention rate in cabs like at the moment? Has it got better? Has it got worse? And are we doing anything else to do about that? 25,000 calls a month is a significant drop from where we were about this time last year, and I wonder if you've got any reasons why that's gone down so much. That's my second question. If you like, I'll stop there and then I've got some more.
Okay. Right, well, in terms of the numbers of calls coming through cabs, I'm not sure that I can explain why there are less calls. The service is managing to deal with a large number of calls, but also with a record of effective management and reasonable waiting times, in spite of carrying those substantial vacancies, to help reduce the council's budget gap. So staff in the department are managing the pressures. I dealt with the CIP early on after being given responsibility for the portfolio, which related to a necessary increase in certain fees which had been suppressed. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, really, Councillor Hackwell.
Well, not really. I think if you could find out what the retention rates are for me in cabs, and also if we could find out from officers why there's been a significant drop, because if there's been a change in the data, we ought to capitalise on that and do something to find out what's caused that drop and can we move forward. Okay, so those are those two. Just a question I always ask: how many bus passes are we actually rejecting now? Because I think with a whole industry, over many years we've been talking about this, where we get applications for bus passes and 99% of them get approved anyway. Why do we go through the process? So I would be interested to see where we're at the moment. You probably haven't got that information with you. I understand that. I'll move on to translation services. We've now got a lot of technology in even smartphones that do instant translation via voice or text. Are we pursuing that sort of technology within cabs to reduce the amount of translators we have to employ? Because it's common technology now, and it should be applied where it can be applied. And I wonder whether we've got any plans to introduce that technology into the cabs translation service.
Okay.
I've got some more.
I think that's something I can probably provide a more detailed answer to in writing, for you in writing. But I did deal with issues with CIP early on in being given responsibility for the portfolio relating to an increase in fees. So, but that service has performed very well. But
My
in
point
terms,
is it's commonplace technology these days. It doesn't have to be human to human anymore.
I guess it depends who the recipients are of the advice or the translation, isn't it? Because for some people that will work, having use of a technology, but there will be people who will prefer human response to their difficulties.
Of course, but where it can be used, it should be used, in my view, anyway. Okay, I'll move on. You mentioned in the report that we've got 13,000 people signed up to the electronic...
Sorry, can you speak into your...
You mentioned in the report that we've got now 13,000 people signed up to the electronic council tax billing, which is a good
Yeah.
start for a project that's probably a year old now. What are we doing to encourage more people to do that? Are we incentivising staff to sort of, every time they come on the phone, we ask them, would you sign up? And the people that sign the most people up get a bonus. I don't know, something like that. But it's a good cost saving, and it should be encouraged more, because I think we've got about 112,000 households, and 13k is not that great when you look at that, though it is a vast improvement from where we were. I know that one of the reasons that we introduced it was that 7% of the phone calls were people ringing up to check what their council tax balance was. I wonder if we could know the number of what that's reduced, and has it been successful in reducing that number, or has it made no difference? I'd be interested to find out.
I don't have numbers, I'm afraid.
Could we find
for
out?
That, yes.
Thank you. Okay, so end of cabs. Going on to HR, I was amazed to see that in the last 9 months of 2013, we've actually issued 673 new contracts. That's around about a third of the full-time staff. Have we really replaced a third of our staff in the last 9 months?
I can't give you a breakdown of that, but I am aware that we have a number of staff who have joined in the last 12 months and haven't been retained. So that's a problem that may have contributed to that.
It's a huge number, a third of our staff, to issue new contracts. Unless I've misread the report, of course, but that's what it says to me.
I can give you a detailed response to that.
And finally, you'll be pleased to know, the permanent, we've converted 10 people permanent out of over 200 temporary or contract staff, which is less than 5%. And we know a lot of that was in legal due to the change in the structure. So what are we doing to improve that that very low number that we've actually converted of less than 5% in the next 6 to 9 months?
It's not going to be an instant outcome. It's an ongoing process. Some people have converted to substantive posts from a locum position, and that's given rise to significant savings within the legal service. I mean, what information specifically are you looking for?
Well, you said it's a top priority for HR. You're responsible for HR.
Yeah.
We've only converted 10 people in the last 6 months out of over 200 to permanent positions.
In a particular area?
I just read the numbers from your report. It says we've converted 10, and we know that 4 or 5 of those came out of legal because we approved in full council of a new structure, which enabled them to locums to convert. So that means in the rest of the 200 staff, we've converted sort of 5 or 6 people. And I just wonder, if it's a top priority, what are we going to do differently to make sure that we can transfer or convert those people to permanent staff rather than contract staff? Because we've got a huge mountain to climb.
It is a mountain to climb, but where we started from was 70% of staff in legal services were locums. And that number has significantly reduced. Some posts being filled through recruitment and some for locums converting to substantive positions. So actually, I think that is a very positive outcome. It significantly reduced the number of locums within the legal services department over the last couple of months.
In your report, it says 11 people were recruited to permanent positions in legal. We've got over 200 people on contract.
To be fair, when that document was printed, that may well have been the case. This is a moving issue, and so on a weekly basis, those posts are being filled. So I know that the numbers that are referred to in that report are now less than they were when that report was produced. Because I had, the last meeting I had was about a week ago with legal services. There was a significant difference in the numbers of locums at that point.
Thank you, Councillor Van Dijk, and thank you, Councillor Hopper, for your questions. Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just to you first, I would ask that any responses that they're included to all councillors on this committee. Thank you. I'm just going to go back on a couple of points that were covered slightly by Councillor Lawrence. 6.44, saying on recovery, 13,600 liability orders.
Sorry, can you tell me the number again, please?
13,600.
No, the number, the bullet point.
6.44.
6.44. Yeah.
So it states on there that at the moment all we can claim back is £80 summon costs, but that is rising to 95 with liability costs coming in of £25, 120. Do you know the actual cost to the council for everyone, on average, for each of these liability orders when we raise them?
No. Again, you'll get an answer in writing to that question.
Okay. Next one, 6.5.13. You're stating that the advertising shortlisted and recruitment of Director of Place and Assistant Director of Community and Culture roles fully in-house without the use of an external agency, saving the organisation circa 45 to 50k. I just wondered, what was the cost of doing that in-house? Was there additional staff that were recruited to be able to do the recruitment? And what sort of salaries are they on? So is that 45 to 50k a true reflection of the saving, or is that just what we paid less to recruitment agencies by not using them?
You'll get an answer in writing on that.
Okay, that's it. Other questions have already been asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Joy, and thank you, Councillor Van Dijk. Councillor Ettridge.
Thank you, and thank you for your report. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of it. I've came as a substitute at the last minute, so I've gleaned a couple of little bits and pieces. But my first question comes back to the cab's phone calls. Is there any analysis at all of how many calls went to a specific department and why?
I believe there is, and that is information that we can provide to you.
Thank you very much. Is there any information in terms of the number of abandoned calls?
Abandoned calls. I don't know whether that information can... Yes, that information can be collected, so we will share that with you.
Okay, thank you. And then Councillor Lawrence asked about productivity, and you quite rightly stated you can't give a thing on productivity because you're looking at new members of staff. But I'm now turning that around slightly to say performance of existing staff. There are only checks made on the performance of existing staff, especially those working from home, in replies to emails or calls left on their answer phones.
I believe there is a process in place for that.
Could that be shared with us, please? Because that would be very interesting to see the time that's actually taken to respond all to those. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ettridge, and thank you, Councillor Van Dijk. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Councillor Tejan. Thank you for the report, Councillor Van Dijk. Several of these questions that have been asked tonight are about the possible use of technology, and I believe that they fall into actually the leader's report on one Medway. And also I think that some officers in this room could answer in detail some of these questions that have been asked, particularly around the monitoring of people at home, and I think that that falls fairly and squarely into HR, and I think that officers could give a verbal update tonight, and that would really help, and also would stop having to write reports about stuff that can be given here in this committee. My questions are around the contacts, the telephone contact centre. I would ask for consideration to be made that we also make sure that the signposting to services where we've got joint services is just reminded to be done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And I'm thinking particularly around our licensing, because licensing is a big important part of what we do, both on a legal sense and also in the fact that actually if we don't have licensed acne drivers and private hire, we are in danger of not having enough mobility for our residents. So that I would just like to ask if you as portfolio holder could just see if that's something that is really in the consciousness of the front end of our council. The second question I wanted to talk about was actually the fact that officers and members of the opposition, and also the people who took part in the pilot for MedPay, need to be commended with the people we've worked with. If this council doesn't have a proper structure for people to come in at one grade, which I believe now is a level 2, Councillor Hackwell, it was level 3 when I managed the service. Anyway, hopefully we will get to a place whereby we've got people wanting to work for Medway Council, not just for money, but for a commitment and a career progression. And I thank everybody on that. Councillor Van Dijk, I would say that getting people into permanent positions has been really quite successful in some areas. I don't know if this report reflects it, but I remember going to a talk from people, the people services, and people who were employed as social workers here had a great energy. And I don't think in all fairness to people, that we can measure that energy in any realistic way. But I would be very grateful to hear from HR if we can.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Van Dijk, would you like to respond?
Yes, I mean, I think that a lot of work is being done to address the concerns that staff have at the moment, because particularly where they're not all coming into Gunwharf, as I said before. I think there are some positive there's some positive action taking place within HR to address those issues. And I can give more detail of that later. We had a very long conversation about that this morning.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Van Dijk. I mean, first of all, I'll just follow on from what Councillor Brown was saying. I think the technical, the small detail of the reports, and I'm going to say it because, you know, there are other members here that have been portfolio holders, and it's, you know, Councillor Van Dijk has worked flat out, as others have in the past, I presume, but I know you had challenges galore on this portfolio, so first of all, I'm going to congratulate you for that. And I suppose I will follow on from what Councillor Brown is saying, is that some of the small detail that we're going to have written letters back would have saved you time if some officers would have answered for you in advance. That would have helped. But can I offer you congratulations, Councillor Van Dijk, on the disabled badge process? I was one of the individuals, as you remember, that was totally against going online for disabled badges. I felt that we were doing a disservice to our residents, especially those that thought it might take longer, etc. But I can see that the outcomes for that are tremendous. I mean, we've got to look at that from that side of things, because there was a lot of concern. So I just wanted to thank you for that, because I really didn't think that we'd be able to turn that around, and we have. So thank you very much for that, Councillor Van Dijk. And I'm sure if we continue at that rate and people get their badges on time, then we won't have the complaints we used to have in the past. So they were obviously teething issues at the beginning, but thank you very much for all that work. Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Van Dijk, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you. I have no other member. Oh, Councillor Prenter.
Thank you for letting me come back in. I've worked out what I've written. Sorry about that. Sorry about that, Councillor Van Dijk. So it may be you, or it could be Sam who answers this. Then it's regarding the forward procurement plan, and you note on your report that there's reluctance for change, and I'm wondering if there's an understanding of the reasons why the reluctance to change to bring forward the procurement plan. Keep going with it. Is it, and the resource pressures, is it because you can't recruit people, or there's no funds to pay the additional staff you need? And the other one I was just going to mention, the other question, if that's okay, was just about the interpreting service that you mentioned over there. You mentioned that the clients include the other public clients like schools and like academy schools and NHS. Presumably they all pay for that service, so I don't know if that's you or an officer who could answer that. Thank you.
I don't think that I have the information about how payments are made for that, so perhaps I don't know if anyone can answer.
Yes.
There is a charging mechanism for interpreting, which is slightly different to translation services, so it takes into account the social, the cultural differences. So we are looking at translation as well, as Councillor Hackwell mentioned, but there's a very fine nuance between interpreting and translation services.
So the translation could be digitalised, but the interpreting, obviously you need a real person
Correct.
to do it. But you do charge for that, that's what I'm asking.
The interpreting,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah, thank you. What about translation? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sorry, would you like to come back in? Sorry, can you use the microphone?
The reluctance that's mentioned about working on the forward procurement plan and the pressures on staffing, was it? I think.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you. Would you like to come in, Samantha?
Thank you, Chair. This is largely down to cultural change in terms of the way we've done things for a very long time, and then to change the whole process means that there's a number of organisational areas that have got to come together, because it's not just about the procurement team, and we do have some significant gaps within our recruitment, which we're struggling to fill at the moment. So it is about being fully resourced and taking that change all the way through. And I would just say that's not just for procurement, that's probably for a number of areas actually that we're trying to change at the moment. We need to be fully staffed. The pay award has helped us get to that position. One of your questions was around our plans in terms of what the recruitment looks like. So the pay award comes into effect on the 1st of April. We're already publicising advertisements with that on there. What I do want to say is with the med pay review though, some of that has already had an impact. So particularly for the phase 1 that we took forward as a pilot, already the retention is better there and we're recruiting better in those areas. So we haven't just waited for the pay uplift. The med pay review has already had an immediate impact. And as we roll out the rest of the organisation, we have got a flight plan, particularly where we've got high locums in terms of reducing that down. But that's a common theme across the organisation. We need to be fully staffed. Our pay position is so much better. The med pay review is helping us significantly in terms of us being competitive within the market. And that flight plan in each area has an activity plan, and we're resourcing greater in the recruitment team in order to fulfil the needs of that plan.
That's
Thank
good
you.
news. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you again for this fantastic report. I think as you're talking, and where I wanted to come in with a question is so much of the work that's going on behind the scenes and the impact that's having day to day for people in Medway. 3 things that jumped out as particular strengths: that we've never lost any levy funding for apprenticeships. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. The gender pay gap, I thought, should be really congratulated and drawn out. And then the other bit, which is where I want to ask a question, is again around the complaints and the fact that we have a compliment received for every 3 complaints. And I think they're the kind of things that throughout the report is coming out so strongly. I'm really curious about the changes to the way we handle complaints. It might be yourself can elaborate, or one of the officers. And then also the benchmarking of the target, because again, we've obviously had real success, for example, in the social care reporting there of achieving 95.5% when the target's 75. Really curious about how those benchmarks were set and whether they should be amended in light of those successes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cook, would you like to respond, Councillor Van Dijk?
I wonder if I can ask one of the officers to respond to that question.
So the customer relations team that deal with the complaints, liaise with services, it's done on our case management system, so they can actually get complaints out, collate the responses, check the responses, and most importantly, make sure every aspect of the complaint is dealt with so we don't get follow-ups and another complaint. That's really important to get that information out. So they're working with services to increase the quality of the complaints and the responses.
Thank you. Would you like to come back, Councillor Cook?
Yeah, I think just to clarify on that, and just in terms of where the 75% was set, was it benchmarked against other councils? Is it a kind of industry standard? How did we reach that figure, please? Thank you.
So it is a benchmark that we've used with other councils. We compare, but as our performance improves, we will increase our targets as well, because we want to stretch ourselves.
Thank you. I don't have any other members, so we come to you, the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation 1.1 at page 15 that the committee notes the report.
Is that supported?
Seconded. Yes.
Agreed? Great, that brings us on. Thank you, Councillor Van Dijk, for your response, and thanks for attending this committee. Thank you. That brings us on to agenda item 6. I would like to welcome the leader of the council, Councillor Vince Maple. And I will ask the Leader of the Council, once he's has taken his seat, whether he would like to make any comments in relation to his report prior to questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just two quick things from my perspective. Firstly, a thank you to you as a committee. As someone who sat in one of those chairs for a number of years, I know the important work that you do, and in particular the pre-decision scrutiny, one of which you'll be obviously rushing through your questions to me, because actually I really welcome the fact of this. And for me, that's important to say really loud and clear as an administration, as a leader of a council. I don't fear scrutiny. I welcome it. It's helpful. It makes our decision-making better. And then secondly, I want to thank those officers, obviously all officers, but particularly those who work directly within my portfolio, some of whom are in the room tonight, and of course their teams who are not in the room tonight. I'm very, very lucky to have some of the best officers of the council, as the other 9 cabinet members would say as well, for the avoidance of doubt, delivering well, and you can see that throughout the report. And finally, before I hand back to you, Chair, I welcome you personally as an opposition councillor, being in the role you're in, and I think you've done, I've not been here, but I've been watching, not sounding too stalkery, I hope, but I've been watching these committee meetings, and I think this has been a well-run committee under your chair, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Maple. Over to you, members. Any question? Councillor Ettridge.
Thank you, and thank you for your report. But of course, I'm not going to go to that, as you well know. I'm looking at the following report in terms of the Medway plan and your #1 priority, which is looking social care, and especially for adults. There are a number of people within Medway that require that service. They are reasonably well cared for within that service, but unfortunately there is quite a substantial number that aren't. And the reason being is that their injuries or their issues are so severe that the number of carers that actually know how to look after them properly, look after the equipment that they use, is very sparse. Now, I fully appreciate that the council is in a difficult financial position, but I see absolutely no reason why we should be sending people out as a carer to somebody that has specific needs, specific problems, and the carers that go there have no idea who they're dealing with, what they're dealing with, or even the equipment they're using. And then following on from that, my last point out of this is that when the recipients of this care complain, they are deemed as difficult, and therefore people don't want to deal with them. And I find that quite appalling. So that's my question to you. How can we hope to resolve the real issue of a number of people in Medway? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. And of course, we've spoken about an individual case, and we won't talk about that tonight. But look, there's a few things with this. Do we have enough resources? No, we don't. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go through tonight. And look, for the avoidance of doubt, of course, this sits fairly and squarely for adults with Theresa Murray, and for children with Adam Price. But I'm happy to answer the question on this tonight, because it is around that one Medway approach, as you say. So some of this will be around the sector. So that's not us necessarily going out to deliver the service ourselves, but we may well be commissioning others to do that on our behalf. The market is not where it needs to be. And that's not the fault of officers. That's not really even the fault of the market. That's a challenge around recruitment, and we could have a debate why perhaps recruitment in areas like social care has got more difficult since perhaps 2016. I think there's a lot of issues to look at around the skill set and actually the respect. There's something around respect. So successive governments have talked about trying to deal with the social care challenge. And to date, no one's been able to do that. And I think part of the challenge around recruitment and retention, and therefore skills for hard-working women and men delivering that service to our residents, is actually around how it's perceived by the public. So if you ask people what do they think about the NHS? They'll say it's amazing, it's wonderful. They're doing great things every single day. We're giving freedom of the borough to the hospital. And all those things are accurate and correct. If you ask people about social care, children's or adults, but particularly adults in this case, you won't get such fawning words. In some cases, you'll get, well, we've got 3 different carers for my mum, and that's not good enough. Or actually, they were delayed because their transport was not working. You know, you'll get more challenging stories, I think. That's not a Medway thing, that is a sectoral thing across England, actually, I think. And again, it's not unique to us. So we need to disrupt the market a bit. Care for Medway will do some of that, but it won't be a panacea. We need the market to step up and look at actually where are there gaps in skill sets. So is it bariatric treatment, for example? And actually do our assessment processes, and again, this is not a Medway thing, this is a local government for England and Wales thing. Do we have a process to recognise, you know, specific sets of circumstances which if you had unlimited resources and the right talented individuals sat there waiting to go, you'd go, well, that person definitely needs triple handing. Well, actually, we may not have the resources and we may not have the people. And that's not because we don't want to have them. It's just in some cases they're simply not there. Obviously, when you were holding Zoe to account a moment ago, that, you know, recruitment and retention is not a Medway Council unique problem. We had the ICP meeting today, the Integrated Care Partnership, and we were talking there more generally about recruitment and retention from lots of different aspects. So it's a real challenge, and it's right to raise it here. It's right for this council as a unitary authority to be saying, actually, the care sector, particularly perhaps for adults, we've had a strong focus in this council for a number of years on children's services. We need to rectify that to bring it to more equal parity. I think that's the right thing to do from a perspective of conversations. So it's a challenge. And I'm not going to say we'll be able to fix it overnight. We definitely have things in place which will make it better and easier. And actually some of that's around relationships as well. So relationship with the health providers. You know, making sure discharges are happening at the right point. And that's around, you know, excellent professionals like Leanne and her team from a council perspective, having a mature relationship and having political support from myself, and in that case, from Teresa and Adam, and from children and adults' perspective, to say, actually, when we're having those tricky conversations about discharge, are we in a position where we can make the right choices for the individual? Because in too many cases, and this is a no-blame statement, that the conversations around almost cost shunting, that's a word I've heard professionals use, and that's the sad reality of it. So recognise it. I'm not going to sit here and go, that's nonsense. I know it's not nonsense. I know it's happening as a real-life case, and that won't be the only one. But I'm confident that we've got both in senior officers, in their teams, and in the political leadership. And I think there's a level of cross-partiness to this particular issue. I think, you know, regrettably, you know, people up at SW1 could be looking on a bit more as to, you know, this is a really tricky issue. And here's the thing, whatever the solution, it will take more than 4 years, so i.e. more than one administration of this council to get right. So there we go, that's where we are.
Thank you for your answer, and it's much appreciated what you said. In terms of cross-party, locally, I will always support whoever's here to provide the right support for our adult and children in special needs, always.
Thank you, Councillor Etheridge. Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vince, for your report. Firstly, it is good to read that we've got the Household Support Fund, again, albeit only for 6 months. I think that's been a very, very beneficial fund for this council, providing the free school meals for the children in the holidays, etc. Would it be possible to investigate whether we can provide that service for homeschooled children? Because at the moment they're excluded, and I have spoken to some people at food banks, etc., that feel that they're hard done by because they homeschool their children and they don't get that privilege of the money during the holidays. So if you could take that away and have a look at it, I'd appreciate. I think the other thing is, glad to see that you're retaining Medway Matters, which was not quite your stance a year or so ago, and also that you've done something sensible and reduced the frequency of it to try and reduce some of the costs. So I think the sensible approach has seen through at the end. I thought that at full council the ability for come back for the public questions was a good step forward. And I just wonder whether we're going to extend that to councillor questions. I think that would be a marked improvement as well. I won't talk about the finance and the missed audits and things because we covered that at audit committee quite thoroughly, so I won't bring it up here.
Thank you, Councillor Hockwell. Councillor Medway, would you like to respond?
Thank you. And actually, I will pick, as you are not going to mention it, I will do very quickly, just to thank the Audit Committee. Audit Committee don't hold me to account as a finance portfolio holder, but I know, particularly through these challenging times, which again are not a Medway thing, and for those of us who sit on Kent Fire and Rescue, we've gone through the same process with our audit. It's utterly frustrating. And again, that's a sectoral issue. That's not down to our particular auditor. That's just the system creaking at the seams and needing, I think, a level of government intervention, not to save auditing, but to just recognise there's an issue and therefore work out a roadmap to how do we get back to a level of normality, some of which, of course, was driven by COVID, but not all of it, actually, I think. On your 3 points, on homeschooled children, happy to take that away and have a look at that. Obviously, if they are in receipt of effectively universal credit, or certainly be able to access Medway Go, but it is around almost the other 39 weeks of the year. So let me take that away and have a look at that, and I'll certainly come back to all committee members on that. Again, I'm not sure around the specific rules, so I don't want to say we'll do it if we're told actually by central government we can't, and that's fine. On Medway Matters, thank you, and thank you also for actually being at the inaugural Medway Matters Live. We are taking a different approach. You can see the numbers in there with 1 Minute Medway it's actually now over 300,000 views. You know, I think we're taking the right approach. It wasn't, you're right to say, the 2019 manifesto, which the people of Medway didn't support, and the 2023 manifesto, which they did, had a different set of views and opinions, and that's fine. But yeah, and actually the team, I can tell you firsthand, the team worked incredibly hard, as many councillors will know, to deliver that good quality piece of literature, which I think is well received. We are looking, I think I'd say here, we are looking at what happens to the What's On guide. I think there's a differential of views around that potentially, so between now and next time you hold me to account, you might see some changes in that. And again, always happy to hear feedback on that accordingly. On if the chief legal officer was here, and he's not here tonight, I've said I'm happy he's not here for the avoidance of doubt. I've given him the night off. So he would say, don't make anything to extend full council a minute longer than it already is. I think the balance with councillors' supplementary questions is this. There has been a fundamental shift. So what we didn't have, certainly for the last 16 years prior to May the 4th last year, was a monthly meeting with the leader of the council and opposition group leaders. Now, I don't know how Adrian and Elizabeth, as it was, managed that with the other 18 members of the group. That's a matter for you. But certainly I've found those meetings helpful. I think they've been cordial. Again, obviously, George Crozer has been at those as well, because it's both political groups. So I think there's other opportunities for members to be able to raise their questions through, in these cases, their group leaders. I wouldn't say we wouldn't go back there, because we might do, but actually at this point, you know, the clear, strong message from colleagues on a very strong cross-party basis was council meetings going past midnight are not acceptable, because not least because actually lots of people around the table of 59 have got other things to fill their daytime with, and also council officers have also got to do that as well. So, but look, that's where we are at the moment. But I am pleased with the improvements we've made. I think the informal approach we've taken was the right one, and we will, I think, at some point during the next municipal year, firm that up formally in the Constitution. But again, that will be through consensus. That won't be through 31 of us going, that's a good idea, and then we're going to do it, most of the changes will have general consent. That's what I want to see. It's all of our council meeting, ultimately.
Thank you, Councillor Medway. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vince. Just a few really quick questions, Vince. The first one being, I suppose, is I think we've all seen how positive the 1 minute Medway's been, and that difference in the leadership press style. How have you found it from residents, the feedback from that? Because I know sometimes you get frustrated if it goes 1 minute, 3 seconds or something, but I mean, you know, but it is pretty short and sweet, but to the point, especially from cabinet members as well. So that's the first one. The second one is, how excited are you about the 1 Medway Charter? Because we're hearing about it a lot more, and obviously you've got the 40th anniversary at Dockyard and you signed it there, etc. So a little bit more detail on that. And I suppose finally it's around, I know you sit on many boards of many partnerships. And I think knowing you, Vince, you would always say yes to others as well. So my comment around that is, what's the response since you've taken over on those partnership boards? Because the challenges are elsewhere as well as here with finances. And also with regards to the MPs in the area as well, with regards to the challenges of the financial, you know, the financial picture that we look at. Cheers, Vince.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan, for your questions, and thanks for the work you do as chair, obviously, of one of our other scrutiny meetings. On 1 minute Medway, it's taught me a couple of things. I need to be personally better at LinkedIn. I'm not very good at LinkedIn, truth be told, but that's actually where a lot of people see it, lots of professionals, our partners, and on Facebook, less so on X, Twitter. But yeah, people are noticing it, picking up the messages. Certainly the one we had just a couple of weeks ago, you know, the first one we've done with a special guest, we had Sir Trevor Saw from the Dockyard, and that was the first time they'd announced publicly the issue around 40% off discount tickets for residents here in Medway, and lots of positive feedback about that. So I think it's a really useful tool. Part of my initial thinking of it, for those of you who are sad enough to follow me on Facebook, you will recall actually during COVID, I did things which were much longer than a minute. They were like 41 minute Medways. So some would say much better to just have a minute. Occasionally we go over, and that's fine too. On the 1 Medway Charter, look, in one sense, it changes nothing, because actually the maturity of the relationships between the 8 organisations is there and continues to be there. But I think saying publicly to the people of Medway, look, these organisations, some of whom have got some really challenging circumstances going on at the moment, finances, you know, let me firstly actually at this point, this first public opportunity to say, you know, best wishes to Karen Cox. Obviously we had the news of her, one of the 8 original signatories to the Charter. And it's right, you know, so it's about saying to the public of Medway, our residents who we sit here to represent, to say actually these organisations are going to work together as best as possible. So some of those are long-standing things, so the relationship between the literal next-door neighbours when we can get into Gun Wharf, obviously next to the Dockyard. Obviously, there's an increasing level of work with the ICP, with our health colleagues, and you know, Medway Council takes the chair of the ICP for the next 2 years later on in the following academic year, municipal year. So look, all of those things are happening, but I think part of it for me is ultimately actually the item you're going to discuss next, which is around our vision around our council plan, but also ultimately I've got and again, this isn't a secret, I've got a vision where we would have effectively a 1 Medway plan which would bring together, in the current case, the 8 signatory organisations to say, actually, you've all got your corporate plans, what are you doing collectively? What are you effectively doing to make sure that that isn't just a document gathering dust, a signed bit of paper? So that will take time. That's something which, you know, would take a bit of time. We've seen that elsewhere. So I think there's a good opportunity to bring that forward, which moves me on to that wider partnership work. I think, look, I'm a different person to the person who was sat here this time last year. You know, I support a good football team in North London, and there are other differences as well. both in style, in substance, and that's fine. You know, I'm sure there are some partners who preferred the previous style, and that's perfectly fine. There are others who have commented positively on the different approach. That's fine too. For me, it's about trying to make sure we end up with the best possible outcomes for Medway residents. So having good partnerships, working with all of those who want to work with us, which I hope is as many people as possible, to get us to the point of saying, actually, yeah, Medway is a good place. People have heard me say, actually, what does our administration success look like? People feeling more proud to live here in 2027 than they do today and they did a year ago. That's not easy with all of the backdrops we've got, but that's my determination. And then finally, on the MPs, look, I've had a cordial relationship with them before May the 4th. Again, one of them supports the wrong North London football team. She should know better as well. And yeah, we don't agree on everything. That's absolutely fine. That's politics. But we can disagree agreeably. And we've had a couple of meetings. We've got another one coming up before the end of this municipal year. I think those have been useful meetings to look at some real kind of nitty-gritty minutiae, but important stuff to residents and the big picture as well. And we agree sometimes and we disagree sometimes, and that's okay. And again, particularly Richard as Chief Executive, his work there has been instrumental in making sure that, of course, the whole council's voice is heard when we've got that meeting happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maple. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your report, Vince. Can I just say it was nice to spend a few social minutes with you at the Mayor's Gala and with other colleagues, albeit I won't forget Joanne Howcroft-Scott's comments to me, but I'll go into that another time. The Medway Minute and the general marketing of the council, I've seen a lot of the social media, and I'm very interested in social media. I use it in my business every day, and it's a really good high quality, and I know we lend that to other organisations as well. So that's great. I think anything that promotes Medway as a place is worthwhile, and we should continue to pursue that. Whether the production values are what we really want, lots of noisy traffic in the background, for example, maybe we need to invest a bit of time and effort into that. But anyway, I've got a few questions here. You allude to the Medway 1 plan, and I was very keen that the first task group would be around Medway 1, but I didn't win that argument. I was really pleased to see the increase in investment in Medway 1. Sorry? Yeah, Medway 2.0. What I'm concerned about is back in I think it was October or November, we did ask for a roadmap plan to be produced because it's a key piece of work, and at the moment there is no scrutiny on that. So what are the KPIs, what's the spend, and everything else? And I've had some really great interactions with officers around this. But your report says sometime this year we will get a roadmap. Now, your budget for 24-25 includes a 2 million saving off the back of that investment. And I think that needs to be brought forward. That roadmap needs to be brought forward because I think you believe in the scrutiny system. I think we could offer a lot of, positives to that plan. So that's a comment. I had a few questions on finance. If you were that concerned about the council's finances, why did you leave it right to the end to appoint SIPFA? Why didn't you do it the moment you came into office? SIPFA identify that the problem the council has is not its spend, it's its revenue. And I wonder, why were you not brave enough to go to residents and ask them to pay more than the 5% cap? I think I was sitting there wondering whether you would do that, because my view is this council needs to raise more revenue, and it can't be through car parking charges and increased fees here. We need revenue with 6 zeros attached to it. And I don't think we can continually look to central government because we spent £450 billion bailing us out of COVID. There is no money. We can't raise any more income tax because, as we know, income tax rates are at the 70-year high. Where does that money come from? You've hit the council's credit card with a £15 million debit to get you out of trouble for next year. How many more years do you foresee hitting the council's credit card before you get back into a balanced budget? I think Bexley's an example. I think they did it for over 3 financial years, and that is 50 million quid at the end of the day. And I'm wondering what's the likely, given where interest rates are, what the likely impact is on future spending if we get up to that sort of level, because the budget for next year includes increased finance costs of £4.5 million, which is £4.5 million we can't spend on green spaces, repairing bloody potholes. I was invited the chief exec to come to Hempstead and Wigmore and drive through the trenches that are now our roads. And a political question, if you don't mind me. UK Labour are on record as saying they're not going to bail out councils if they win the general election. They have, actually, I've heard that twice. So what's plan B? Thank you.
An excellent array of questions, all of which I'll attempt to give some answers to. On 1 Minute Medway, it's always a challenge because you want it to not just be a cabinet member stood in Gun Wharf saying, this is what's happening this week. You want it to feel a bit more real, which is why we move it around. We make sure it's not always me, absolutely make sure it's not always me. And sometimes that means, you know, taking it to places where there is a slightly more vibrant backdrop. I think we've got good technology, good equipment. Could it be better? Of course it could. That costs money. So I think I'm comfortable with where we are. I think there are other examples of political videos on both sides of the chamber where we've seen examples of where you can't hear a thing because you're stood in a wind tunnel. Those are political videos and we should all learn from that. So actually I think the stuff that the council delivers, not just 1 Minute Medway, actually some of its other videos as well, and I think, I don't have the exact figure, but I suspect if you compare and contrast the last 10 months with the 10 months between this holding to account and previous, the number of videos from portfolio holders is probably hundreds of times more than it was. So, yeah, I don't disagree that could things always be slightly better? Of course they could. Nothing is perfect. But if I was able to set my ringtone to the whoosh of 1 Minute Medway, I would do that, but I can't, so I can't. On Medway 2.0, it is really important. That's why this is the Business Support and Digital Scrutiny meeting. That was a very deliberate decision that we took as an administration, and I think is the right thing to do. There are officers here, Paul in particular, who does an outstanding job. I'm not going to say it will be with you by midday tomorrow afternoon. I know him and the team are working as hard as they can, and I absolutely would welcome repeated visits back to this committee at the appropriate time in the system. So again, I don't want to make you an unrealistic commitment, but what you absolutely should be hearing from me tonight is by the time I'm back here next year, you would have had that issue to this committee more than once, is my anticipation, and you can hold me to account to that particularly. And obviously that it's wide-ranging. You're right to say actually the assumptions we've made are challenging. It would be naive to say otherwise. So that work needs to happen, and I would welcome Scrutiny doing its job as it has done ever since I've been a councillor, actually. On SIPFA, this is a balance. So we knew stuff was going to be difficult. Genuinely, we didn't know quite how difficult it was going to be till we've got our hands on all of the information. We then had that information. We then went through the process internally, you know, particularly working closely with Phil as Chief Operating Officer to talk about what the options were, and it was his suggestion, which I wholeheartedly backed and supported, to bring forward SIPFA. So could it have been done on the 5th of May? Maybe, but actually we didn't have all of the information I think we needed as a cabinet in particular. And of course, you've heard me talk about the kind of team of 25 approach we have with the corporate management team. You just have to look at the award-winning local authority blog to see how different that team of 25 approaches to perhaps, again, the person who was sat here who, at some points by his own public admission, was a team of one. So we are taking a different approach, but that takes a bit more time. So from that perspective, it was right. Why no referendum? Well, partially, SITFA were clear that we should be taking the two approaches we did. Both of those are difficult. You know, I don't want to be in year one of my administration with my new cabinet and new team of councillors going to government saying, we need assistance. And it turns out that we were not the only ones. You know, of all political persuasions, from a couple of million to a billion and everything in between. Some of those of all political persuasions were poor decision making. Some of those, including Medway, as you know, SITFA's words were clear, absolutely. This is just around the amount of money we've got and the pressures we've got. And we're doing what we can to reduce the pressures, going back to actually questions earlier on from Gary in particular, around social care, for example. So yeah, I think it's right to take all of that in the balance to say to government, look for those two things. I'm not sure whether we would have got a yes vote to a referendum either. That's the other reality of it. And then we would have spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on a referendum that would have cost taxpayers money and not brought in any additional revenue. No other council, you know, statement of fact, no other council has gone through the referendum process since the rules have been there. There is an argument to say, of course, there shouldn't be a referendum limit. That's a different political debate, which I think there probably is, I think for local government elected representatives, probably a level of consensus to say, actually, if you're truly looking at devolution, give us the decision-making powers and then people can decide every 4 years, in our case, as to whether they agree with what we've done or not. I had a slight cringe when you said the council's credit card. If I had a list of Room 101 things that bug me a little bit about life, and I've probably done it myself, it's where people refer to a £500 million organisation similar to your household finances, which is a very easy thing to do in one sense, but if there is a council credit card, it definitely hasn't got £15 million on it at the moment. The point you make around interest rates is important. So it may have got lost in the noise, but let me say it again here very clearly. At the moment, government's offer of exceptional financial support, which is not extra money, it is just extra flexibility, comes with quite a punitive interest rate. The Public Works Loan Board rate plus 1%. We have pushed back to government to say, don't be punitive to us. This is not poor decision making. This is not betting it all on a solar farm. This is about us having more pressures than there is pennies. Therefore, it's right that you put an interest rate on it because that's reasonable. I'm not saying that's not unreasonable. But actually make it just a PWLB rate. So, and we've not heard a formal response back on that. I'm looking to Phil in particular. I don't think we've had a response back on that request at this stage. On the Public Works Loan Board request, the reducing the interest rate, I've not seen a response. So yeah, we're still waiting at this stage. I think the timescale you said for Bexley is probably not dissimilar to where we are. It will take us a year longer than it would have done if we'd had both levels of flexibility. So the fact we only got the borrowing flexibility and not the council tax flexibility means an additional year. And on potholes, I agree. Medway is not unique in this. You know, it is every council, over every upper tier council, up and down the country. It was a second news item on BBC Breakfast last week. I think the figure I've seen from an industry organisation is £16 billion to fix England's roads. Spoiler alert, we haven't got £16 billion, or the bit that we have that we would need to do our bit. So I recognise it's a challenge. On social media, on everywhere else, I am tagged on lots of issues around potholes. We have a process, we have a clear process that we go through to designate accordingly. That's happening this year, that's happening next year, with not enough resource. That's it. You know, Ruth's here. Undoubtedly, if she was given more resource, we'd fix more potholes more quickly. We are using some technology to try and identify potholes more quickly. That will help, but again, that won't stop all the potholes being there now. So from that perspective, I think, I recognise the difficulty that Medway's drivers are in with potholes. It would be naive to say anything other than that right now. But actually, we were over in KCC land today, and people were saying exactly the same there. So this is not a Medway problem. Of course, if you only drive on Medway roads, it will feel like a Medway problem. For those individuals, and I know there'll be some around this table, and again, some across Medway who go far and wide across England in particular, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And again, we could get into the political row around funding for local government, but we're not going to tonight. And then on Plan B, so I think I'd say a couple of things. Certainly from a perspective of devolution, I am genuinely confident that we will get a better option than what we currently have. So I don't think anyone here in this room from an elected perspective is against devolution. More powers and more money. The problem and this isn't personal against Gove or the government, but it's what we've got the offer of a kind of binary choice at the moment. It's like you can have these powers and this money, but you've got to have this democratic process and nothing else. What we're hearing from Angela Rayner and Jim McMahon is that there'll be more of a bespoke approach. And I think actually that I have some confidence in that to say actually, if you look at the crime panel, for example, I'm not saying we'd get rid of police and crime commissioners, but actually the crime panel made up of the councils across Kent and Medway, having the ability to deliver, in that case, holding someone to account. If you were looking at something like transport, rather than having transport for the South East, having transport for Medway and Kent, with the right powers, the right accountability, but that doesn't need to be an elected mayor, and the right ability for individual elected members, councils, the community to be able to influence that. That's got to be a more approachable approach, I would say.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. We'd like to come back.
Thank you, Councillor Maple. I find myself agreeing with much of what you said. I think there's the way central government handcuffs local authorities is undemocratic. It's absolutely undemocratic because ultimately we are elected, we want to be accountable, and the fact we only get a 30% turnout shows that actually there's not a lot of difference between what you put in your manifesto and what we put in our manifesto at the end of it, albeit yours was mostly on national issues, of course, and ours is more on local issues. So I would absolutely support this council leading a charge to get those handcuffs removed, and then we can all be accountable for what we put in our budgets, absolutely. I had just one more point I wanted to make, if you don't mind, Chair. Just, you were very critical of the previous administration for using reserves to plug the budget gap. You've done exactly the same, haven't you? Haven't you, for 2023-24? You've used the reserves to plug the 11 million gap that you've got in the outturn. So are we going to now, you're going to put that one to bed and don't bring it up again?
So there's no reserves left. Phil
You've spent the last £11 million worth of it.
Well, of course, not quite as simple as that because, of course, we've unring-fenced some and all the rest of it. I think, look, I recognise that in 16 years as an opposition councillor, 11 years of those as leader of the opposition, there will be some things I've said. I recognise that, absolutely. It'd be naive to say otherwise. So, yeah, I was pretty critical of the previous administration, particularly budget year before last, where they built it on reserves and then used more reserves to finish it off, leaving us, as a statement of fact, less reserves than what they had spent that year. So even if we wanted to do exactly the same, we wouldn't have been able to, actually. Regrettably, we're in a position now at the moment where we simply can't do that because there aren't the reserves to be able to do that, even if we were minded to. But I think the conversation we had earlier on around CIPFA's advice and recommendations, I think, with our financial improvement process that we're going through, and again, you'll be seeing that as we move forward. I think that's important. And I know this committee will hold that approach to account as well.
Thank you, Councillor Maple. Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Chair. Just on a point when you said about the potholes, I was down at Salisbury at the weekend. and my wife thought I'd wrecked her car going into one of their potholes. So Wiltshire County Council have obviously got the same sort of problems, and I noticed it going all over. One thing that can't be said about you, Vince, is that you don't care about Medway, and you're always fighting for the benefits. So actually on your report on 4.4, you put down that you're on a strategic board for the Court of the University of Kent and Canterbury, and it's been well documented of the closure of courses that seem to be all based in Medway. I just wondered if you got some reassurances from the University of Kent that they are still committed to Medway and to Medway resident, because with the cost of going to university nowadays, one of the largest costs is accommodation, and if people can stay at home, it helps reduce some of that cost. And on the other one, it's just a bit of bugbear of mine on 6.3.4. You mentioned the communication channels and the Medway matters. Yes, I think it's brilliant. But being a Medway resident, I received my copy through the post around about the same time I received my a copy that comes through like everyone else's through the door. I know it's only a small cost, and I'm pretty sure we're all Medway residents. It's around about £2 to post each one of these. That's £118 a time. It's not massive amounts, but as a council, we're trying to reduce costs. Why do we continue to post to councillors when we're getting it about exactly the same time when it drops through the letterbox anyway? Thank you.
So, obviously, I'm not a member of this committee. This is a committee that might want to make, through the Vice Chair, a recommendation on your second point. I'm happy to take that away. I think that's very sensible, and I agree. You know, we all get it. So I think not sending a second copy to councillors would be a good cost saving, not least because postage went up just this week. Celia's here as well. She's heard that, so we'll take that away. But if you want to make that a formal, because that is an action for something to actually stop and change. So I'm happy if the Vice Chair, obviously it's your committee meeting, but if the Vice Chair was to pick that up in his recommendations at the end, I would be very supportive of that. I think that's a sensible cost saving, and literally every pound matters, that's true. On the university, it is deeply disappointing that we're losing particularly the stuff which has been based here for some time and has added real value, I think, to the university. So losing particularly Centre for Journalism. As councillors, they will quite often, their students will quite often contact us, and I know councillors on both sides of the chamber give their time freely to support those young journalists in their journey. Journalism matters. Holding us to account matters. Having people who have got decent training and know the ethics of journalism matter. That is particularly disappointing. There is obviously a link to KMTV as well, and certainly there's some separate conversations happening with them in particular. The university have now appointed somebody who's got a specific focus on Medway, and I'm seeking an urgent meeting with her, along with the acting Vice-Chancellor. Obviously, that is literally breaking news today. So I'll be asking her to attend that meeting as well, just to get that understanding. You know, things like the docking station are a really good example, going back to the one Medway conversation earlier on. The dockyard, the university and the council, you know, 3 of the 8 signatories to the One Medway Charter, working together to deliver good quality jobs and the ability for the BBC, for Netflix, whoever, to go, actually, you can do your post-production 400 metres down the road from where you've just filmed Tom Cruise flying out of a helicopter, or a 1960s midwife helping in Poplar. So, look, I want them to stay. I absolutely want them to stay. The fact that they've put that person in that role so explicitly, I think, is to be welcomed. But I'm disappointed. I've said that elsewhere of their decision. But of course, as we know only too well from the last full council meeting, all organisations, particularly public sector organisations, are having to make difficult decisions. So I don't blame anybody in leadership for having to take a difficult choice. I know only too well there is stuff that I wish this council was still doing, but isn't, because we've had to take difficult choices. But in the sense of early communication around the decisions, and of, indeed early communication today on Karen's decision, We've had that, and again, I welcome that kind of personal relationship. It's important for the people of Medway, because Mark, you're right. I've said exactly the same as you elsewhere, to say actually, particularly over the next couple of years, it's likely to be that families and individuals, young people, will be saying, actually, I want to go to university, but I want to stay at home, just because the costs are still really cripplingly painful in some cases. So I agree with you on that.
Thank you, Councillor Medway. Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm sorry I'm a bit late coming in to ask a question. I was still recovering from Councillor Lawrence advocating a rise in council tax. But can I answer Councillor Joy's point as a point of information? I believe I'm right in saying, but I'm willing to be corrected by officers, because Councillor Joy, like me, is one of those councillors who has Gunwharf as their address on the council website. All his post is going to Gunwharf, and because Gunwharf is closed, it's then being posted to his home address. So Councillor Hatwell is shaking his head, but as I say, I'm very happy to be corrected by officers if I've got that information wrong. If I've got it right, I hope it's helpful to the committee. The question I wanted to briefly ask Councillor Maple, and I'll try and be a bit quicker than I was last time, Chair, but to put it in context, I was interested to see today that the various airports are saying that they won't be ready with security measures in June, which were promised to get rid of the checks on bottles and that sort of thing. Regardless of what you think of the airports not being prepared for the change in security checks, I did think it was very proactive that they were out at this time saying to passengers what was going to happen in June. So I wondered if Councillor Maple had any comments on the need for proactive communications to get ahead of the game, and whether he thinks there's anything we could do to improve in that respect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark. Two points, really. One around the balance between reactive and proactive communication. Like all parts of the council, the communications team is not as big as I would like it to be. I think they do a great job with often limited amounts of people, dealing with sometimes hundreds of inquiries with a small team, certainly from a press perspective. So trying to strike that balance, because we've got stuff we want to absolutely proactively tell people well in advance wherever practically possible, but we are reacting to stuff as well. And we've had plenty of reacting to stuff, whether it was the situation in Wayfield, obviously supporting partners very early on in this administration when they had no power for 4 days. So again, we weren't the lead organisation. We were working with UK Power Networks, MHS and others. So again, that partnership approach, that one Medway approach, or indeed where we want to go and proactively consult with people. So again, the one Medway Council plan, the local plan, we'll be consulting on the local plan again. So I think there is a balance between reactive and proactive, recognising the resource. Because of the changes of how some of the work is being done internally, there's actually been some changes to the internal kind of structures between how different parts of the council interact with comms now. So actually comms and marketing, it's important to say both of those elements, because actually some of that stuff will be around marketing rather than comms, communications. So actually I think that's something which this year I'm confident, you know, I think we get the balance just about right. Sometimes we are reacting to stuff, of course. But I think this year, because actually parts of the council will effectively be securing the amount of hours work they'll be having for their particular part of the council. And let's remember, we deal with hundreds of different services. You will not hear me particularly anymore say 140 services, because I think it's much more than that. I'm not going to sit there and count them all. I know Plymouth Council talks about 300 services, and we're a similar size, although we've got a better dockyard. Don't tell Tudor that. So I think we get the balance about right. on the very specific issue that you raised in bringing this forward, and here's a good example of being prepared, and again, Ruth's here as our representative on the Kent Resilience Forum. Later this year, there are some dramatic changes happening, which will primarily, I think, impact Dover and Folkestone, because this is around entry-exit scheme. So we need to be ready for that. We're likely to have a Kent Council leaders meeting later in the year to look at what's happening there. Those of us who've been around for a while will remember actually one of the series of Operation Stacks actually came all the way back to Medway and beyond, had impacts here. So it's that balance between saying this change is coming, because actually it's important for us to be saying it, and people like Maidstone and Tunbridge and Wales and Tunbridge and Malling, but of course it's different to perhaps Dover and Folkestone and Canterbury, who are much more, even if it goes pretty well, their comms team is still going to have to do a lot of stuff for probably several months. So it's a balance, and for me it's about recognising, absolutely giving people as much warning wherever practically possible, but sometimes that just simply isn't the case. That's the reality of it.
Thank you, Councillor Maple. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Leader, for your report. I'd like to go back to a couple of things, if you don't mind, that you mentioned, and some of them are absolutely in the report, and the report is a consequence of some other issues which are not council issues at all, as you rightly point out. But I'd like to go back to the idea that all universities have had their humanities decimated. That's been a strategic decision, not made here, but made in Westminster. And it might be, when you have your cordial conversations with our MPs, a timely reminder. So I'd like, maybe we could include education as very high on our list, because if we're to survive in Medway, we need an educated cohort of people who want to stay in Medway, and most of all, want to live and work in Medway, because if we don't get that, I don't really think that we're doing our young people the kind of justice that I know you want them to have. And I second what Councillor Joyce says, that you're always on the side of the Medway people. And the Medway people here that we were talking about earlier, our staff and the young people and their children, and as somebody who has and is proud to have an ex-council estate by and large as their ward, I would say that we need to focus on education so that we can have a vibrant population here. So I'm glad to see some of the marketing, in inverted commas, that we're doing and the projects that we're leading. But what I would caution us against is just going down a rabbit hole on some of these issues. And hopefully we will get some traction with government on some funding for fundamental infrastructure and also for people services. But I know that that is a huge ask, but I would go back to the people who are currently sitting in those seats and ask them to review how they voted against things and made sure, and I understand why they did it. I'm not condemning them for understanding why they did it, but remind them that the consequences are in their locality. They're not up in Westminster. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And yeah, so let me take two or three points and strands to flow from that. Certainly, again, the meetings with MPs are cordial, but they've been robust at points. I don't think it would be breaking any confidences to say at the first meeting we had an interesting conversation about the HIF £170 million funding. There was not consensus in the room, I think it's fair to say. So that's fine. You know, we'll certainly continue to press the case, and the next meeting we have coming up, almost certainly, the University of Kent in Medway will be part of that agenda, almost certainly, and the things that flow from that. I think you're right to say education is important. Our young people are pretty switched on. Andrew and I were at a school in Lordswood and we got a pretty hard time. And that's fine. That's a good thing. You know, I want people to be asking me questions, whether they're 9 or 89, their view is valued. And even if they're not old enough to vote, they still should have a voice. I'm strongly a believer in that. I think there is something also around, and this is something I've discussed with Leanne and Celia, I think there's something around our schools. So we as a council still have around 25 schools. I want to feel that they're not looking at their colleagues who are in academies and going, everything's good for you and everything's bad for us. You know, I take a different approach to perhaps some other people who've been here in the past around academisation. If schools wish to go down that route, that's a matter for them. I do have a practical concern that at some point there will be a tipping point to go, if you've got X schools left, can the resource that's needed to give those schools a reasonable level of support, is that viable? Question mark. I don't think we're there yet, for the avoidance of doubt as well. So I'm seeking to meet with senior leaders, along with, of course, Tracy and Adam and Leanne and Celia Buxton, just to have that conversation around what's working well and what could work better, because I think that's a grown-up conversation, and one which I think those school leaders deserve. So you're right to say, actually, we've got to push on education. That is one of those issues, along with housing, actually, those wider determinants as to how people's outcomes are. And you're right, you know, I'm very proud of the work that we're doing on places like, you know, would I love to build another Twiddle tomorrow if we had unlimited resources and space all day long, particularly if they vote the way they did last year. Good timing as well, walking in at that point, Mark. But you know, more importantly, it's because actually housing, as a council leader, someone having good quality housing means they're more likely to be in good employment. Their kids are going to be able to do homework. They're going to have better outcomes for health. We saw a presentation on that earlier today. So we can't, and I think this is something where the Cabinet, and I can't overemphasise this enough, sorry, the Cabinet is working as a team of 10 and asking inquisitive questions. Rather than being siloed, we are a team of 10. So conversation, and that might mean occasionally stuff takes a little bit longer because somebody needs to talk to somebody else. But that's okay, because it means the decision, the outcome will be better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. And thank you, Councillor Maple, for your answer. I have no other member. But just before I come to you, Vice Chair, I want to make Councillor Maple. You've, in the past, have been a strong advocate for protecting jobs in Medway. And you had a meeting with Peel and I believe the businesses at Chatham Docks. I just want to know what the outcome of that conversation and how are things progressing.
Thank you for asking that, and that's a question I can answer without prejudicing any future vote I may need to make on a local plan. So I did say after May the 4th I wanted to get both parties in the room. That either side could have chosen not to come. They both come, and that was very, very positive for me. I think that gives a level of confidence for me to say, actually, this is a real and genuine conversation. I think that there was a level of dialogue between the two organisations that perhaps hadn't been there for a number of years, and that's not anyone's fault. But actually, if you're too busy getting on with your thing and looking down your silo, and to not have that level of conversation probably doesn't help anyone. So it was a genuinely positive conversation. I know conversations are ongoing because I've been copied into emails. Where that will lead, ultimately, I don't know. But the one thing I do know is people will know. I always try and look for the art of the achievable. So if there's a way we can find a solution that makes both parties content, then that's what I'm looking for. Now, that may not be possible. But I've given it every chance I could. Getting people in the room, getting them talking, that conversation continuing offline without me being present, but I am present through the email correspondence. That's a much better approach than having a letter and ignoring it for 18 months, which is what happened previously. You know, you've sometimes got to do difficult things. Bringing people together for a difficult conversation hoping that they'll come, is a difficult leadership thing to do, but it was the right thing to do. And again, I don't know what will happen, but the fact that both sides are still talking in a way they weren't before that meeting is in itself a positive thing, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Maple. Thank you for enduring hours of question, at least. Vice Chair, I believe you have a recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation in 1.1 at page 29, and possibly, if people are content, with a suggestion about culling the councillor paid for delivery of Medway matters.
Councillor Hackwell, do you want to put on your microphone?
I'm trying. If we do that, could we say instead of just culling it, that we get an electronic version earlier, so that in case some of our residents get their copy through the post and want to talk to us about it, I'd be happy with that, but I think it is beneficial to get an early copy.
Thank you, Councillor Hackwell.
And receive an earlier version via electronic copy.
Is that seconded?
Yes.
Councillor Joy. Is agreed? Agreed. Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Maple. That brings us on to agenda item 7. I would like to welcome the Chief Executive of the Council, Richie Higgs. And I would like to ask Richie Higgs, Chief Exec of Medway, to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for that introduction. And members, good evening. I'm delighted to be here to introduce our draft One Medway Council Plan, which sets out the vision and direction of the Council for the next 4 years. And over the last few months, we've been following a process of engagement, both internally with our teams and externally with a range of our partners. We've also undertaken consultation with our residents on the content of the One Medway Council Plan, and the results of that are set out in Appendix 2, and members will see there's a large degree of support for the proposals that we have brought forward. Fair to say, too, that we have drawn on best practice from elsewhere in formulating our One Medway Council Plan. The plan, importantly, sets out our vision for Medway over the forthcoming period, a vision that we have that is of our residents being proud of Medway, whether it's for the school or the university that our residents or their children attended, whether for their green spaces or for their sense of place or for the fact that Medway is a welcoming place. We want our residents to be proud of Medway. And we want Medway to secure the recognition it deserves externally as a great place to live, to work, to learn and to visit, whether that is from government or investors or businesses or from visitors. And to achieve that vision, we've set out 5 priorities, 5 strategic priorities are contained within the plan. And actually members have talked about a number of those aspects during the course of this evening's debate. So quality social care and community services, a good education, jobs and a growing economy, safe, clean, green and connected communities, health and well-being for all, decent quality housing and affordable homes for Medway residents. Those priorities are really important for us. We've made a lot of progress on a number of those fronts over the years, but we know there is more to do, and that is why we've captured those as our priorities. Now, as importantly for me, we've set out our values and our behaviours that guide the way we do things as an organisation, that speak to the kind of organisation that we are. Proud of Medway, taking pride in what we do. Ambitious for Medway, absolutely wanting the best for Medway. Being a trusted organisation, respecting our heritage, our diversity and our communities, being caring and compassionate and being collaborative, adopting that one Medway approach. Underpinning our work, there's a series of principles that are set out within the document, seeking to achieve financial sustainability. We talked about that this evening. Equalities and diversity, working in partnership, climate action, child-friendly Medway, being a good corporate parent, taking responsibility for looked after children and care leavers. All of that is enshrined in our One Medway Council plan, backed up by a series of KPIs, key performance indicators, that will enable us to be held accountable for our performance. So we're bringing it to this committee this evening, seeking the views of the committee, before we take it then on to Cabinet on the 30th of April, for then formal and final adoption at annual council on the 15th of May. I think that's quite apposite for us to be doing it at that stage. Chairman, I'm very happy to take any comments or questions or reflections on our One Medway Council plan, but it's a measure of the importance and the significance of this document that the leader of the council is staying here for this debate, that I'm here, that the Deputy Chief Executive is here, the Deputy Director of Place is here, representing the Director of Place. It's a measure of the significance and the importance of this document that we wanted to be here at this committee, together with the team that we have here that support this committee. So, Chairman, very happy to take any comments. Just while I have the floor, I did just want to thank Celia and Sam, along at the end of the table there, for the excellent work that they and their teams have undertaken to produce this document. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. Any member? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Really interesting read. I just wondered what we were going to do here tonight, go through it line by line and be here till 2 o'clock in the morning or something and make comments. I think to sum up my feelings are, well, the questions I've got is how do we transition from what we're doing now to this, given all the challenges we've got with recruitment, you know, that's the number one. What's it going to cost? What do we think the resources we're going to need to put to one side to get to this? How do we influence external partners, like academies, for example, to deliver the education uplift? Because we know in Medway there's a huge division between grammar school and comprehensive in terms of attainment and progress. But how are we going to, you know, because I don't think we talk about this enough in council, actually. You know, we talk a lot about children and, you know, that they are the future and we want to keep children in Medway. But I don't think we talk enough about the progress and attainment that children are making. The other thing is, do you have the data to set the starting points and do you have the data to measure the success? Because I'm sure this will be a successful plan. And, yeah. I think that's it.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Andrew, for your comments and for your support as well. In terms of the transition from our current arrangements to the new One Medway Council plan, now, clearly, we've had a council plan for some time. That was primarily focused around people, place and growth. This is very much a reflection of the new organisation, the new administration, the new top leadership team as well. And that reflects in the ways of working that we've adopted across the council. For me, what is important is having a clear sense of direction. So in terms of the transition, this is our new way forward. Members will see that, so we've got some reporting that's going to be coming up on the agenda this evening. We're still working through our existing arrangements around our council plan and the previous commitments that have been made from the former administration. So we will be able to work through that process. And in terms of managing the transition, of course, I talked about the engagement that we've undertaken with teams right the way across the council. We've tried to adopt a really inclusive approach on this council plan. It's not been something that's been imposed. It's been something that, whilst there might be a top-level vision that is set out, and members will have heard me articulate that vision many times previously, we've absolutely ensured that working up from the ground up, from the kind of depth of service teams themselves, that we have a clear line of sight on that. So that's one about the transition. In terms of the cost of it, I'm also very clear. So we've got a budget of £580 million as a council. That is a significant sum of money, but actually the demand and the cost pressures that we're confronted by are even more so. So our framing for this is we will be delivering it within that budget of £580 million of revenue spend that we have each year. Second point that you raised around partners and partnerships. So we talked earlier about the One Medway Charter. I'm very clear, we can only achieve the ambitions within this One Medway Council plan by working in partnership. Partnership has always been really important for us here in Medway for years and years, even more so. Vince talked earlier about a meeting that we had, Leanne and I were at, and Scott was at as well, where we were meeting with health partners across Kent and Medway. The need for partnership working has never been more evident. In terms of the specific questions that you raised around education and working with education leaders, that is so significant for us. I've already mapped out the issue about education leading then into jobs for our young people and then a growing economy. Members have heard me say this before. I want our young people in Medway to grow up here and to see their futures here, to get a great education, find a brilliant job here in Medway and see their futures here in Medway too. The final point was around data. So we have quite a team that's been working on all of the data that's underpinned this. As an organisation, we are increasingly trying to ensure that all the decisions that we take are underpinned by data that's informing our approach and what we are doing. And we adopted a really kind of coherent set of processes to derive those KPIs that we've got that are set out for members there. But of course, it is building on a body of evidence that we've established over the years as well. So it's not as if we're starting from ground zero here. Medway Council has been around since 1998, as have I. And so we are building on that body of experience and evidence that we have. Hopefully that's answered Andrew's questions, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew, would you like to come back?
Just one general point. I think the storytelling here is really important, and you do it really well, Richard. But I think we just need to make sure that storytelling goes all the way down the organisation. So, you know, our staff become ambassadors for this. If this is going to be a success, and whether we agree with it or, you know, there's been very little consultation, naturally, but the storytelling is really important. And I don't think you're saying this is not a great place to live. I think you're saying this could be an even better place to live. Is that, have I got that right?
Chairman, if I can, for the avoidance of doubt, I don't think I've ever said anything negative about Medway, ever. I recognise that there are some challenges. Absolutely, I believe in Medway, and absolutely, I believe Medway could be even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Cook.
Thank you very much. Just to agree that I read this report with a lot of joy and excitement. You know, I think I've said publicly before, and I'm sure for all of us in the room, the reason we do what we do is because this is what we believe in, and this is what we know Medway is and can be. A couple of parts of my question. Firstly, strategically, I was really interested in the values behind, and not just what we're going to do, but how we're going to do it. I just wanted to explore a little bit more around how those values and ways of working are going to be rolled out, particularly then across the constitution of the council in terms of training and that kind of thing. And secondly, more specifically, looking particularly around the priorities around Priority 1 and talking about health and inclusion, and really aware of SEND, and it might be one that I know Leanne might want to come in on, but I was really interested that there wasn't more around specific targets around SEND, particularly around diagnosis and long waits for SEND diagnosis, support of SEND children and that kind of area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for your support as well, Esther. Appreciate that. The values and behaviours are really important to me. My management team colleagues will know that when I first became Chief Executive, that was something that I said was really important, because the way we do things, for me, is as important as what we do. And so I personally did a lot of work around the values and behaviours that other organisations kind of adopt and use. But there was also something about the experience that I have of working in Medway Council, and my team has as well. And I'm pretty confident that those 6 values and behaviours are really the ones that will work for us. Being proud, being respectful, being ambitious, being trusted as an organisation, being caring and being collaborative. So in terms of ensuring that works out across the council, Vince was talking about a lot of the communication engagement that he undertakes and that the cabinet undertakes. Certainly that's something that we've been doing as an officer group across the council as well, and working as a team of 25, as Vince has mentioned. So we're doing quite a lot of internal communications around that. I've done kind of various video messages for it. We've held workshops with teams and staff to kind of work up those values and behaviours. We've enshrined them in our PDR process, Performance and Development Review, so they're absolutely captured within the documentation that we use for our PDRs, looking for opportunities for our teams and staff to exemplify those values and behaviours. And it's incumbent on us as a corporate management team, and dare I say members as well, to be living and breathing those values and behaviours, because they're really important to determine the way that we do things around here. Just in terms of, particularly around SEND, so Leanne may want to come in as well, Esther, but I think I've deliberately wanted to have quality social care and community services as the first priority, and that was very deliberate. So both the statutory and the universal services are our top kind of priority there. Of course, we've just gone through our SEND inspection. We've had the outcomes from that, which I think have recognised the good progress that we have made over the period, but also recognising there's still much more to do. And there's lots around assessment, there's lots around communication, there's lots around speed in the process as well. But I'm pretty confident that following on from that inspection, we will be able to take forward those recommendations that have been made to us. There have been identified some things that we need to work on. I am confident that we will be able to do that with the excellent team, led by Leanne, but also with Celia and the excellent team that there is underneath them. But Chairman, if I haven't answered any of that, then maybe Leanne might wish to come in. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add one thing. Underneath this plan sits quite detailed service plans. So the things you were looking for, you'll find there. And of course, you know, off the back of that successful SEND inspection, there is an action plan to work, co-produce with our carer and parent forum partners, and those values that Richard talked about, all of those values, you know, are absolutely key in that area. So I think what you're looking for, you'll find underneath this. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. I have Councillor Ettridge, Joy, and Councillor Huckwell. Councillor Ettridge.
Thank you, and thank you, Richard, for your report just now. Unfortunately, part of your reply has also destroyed half of my question, because I've got the report in front of me, where it makes it very clear that there are still assessments taking far too long to be completed. Communication with families is still pretty poor. However, stating that, in terms of the improvements we've made as a council to SEND services since Medway 2017 is absolutely brilliant. So may that continue. My other concern is now in terms of adult social services. If we had a similar inspection on adult services, would we also be found in a significant area of weakness? And I'm just requesting through you and anybody else, really, that can we actually do a root and branch review of adult services to ensure that we don't be found in that area of weakness? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ettridge. Richard.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Gary, and thank you for your support as well. I think we've probably addressed the SEND issues that you've raised. So, yes, recognising that progress has been made, but yes, still more to do. And that's very much working in partnership, picking up an earlier comment that Andrew made. So working together with the ICB as partners in that space. Just picking up the adult social care issue. So we've been waiting for announcements of CQC undertaking their assurance review, which is a national programme of reviews into adult social care. And fair to say, when Vince and I were new, I don't think we can call ourselves new anymore, We were always told, as leaders of a unitary authority, there are 4 things that are going to give you trouble financially in particular. It was adult social care, it was children's social care, it was SEND, and it was housing. So, of course, as a unitary authority, we faced all of those challenges. And what is interesting for me is that we've gone through that process of seeking to address the finances, but in terms of service delivery, which is what I'm all about, and what we are committed to as a corporate management team, we've been having regular update reports at our corporate management team around adult social care, around how it is dealing with service requests, about how we are handling that service in the round. Adult social care is £140 million of spend of the council's budget each year. That is huge. It is massive. But we are dealing there with some of the most vulnerable residents within our communities. So it's really important for me that we get the service right. That CQC inspection will be landing over the forthcoming period, over the next sort of 6 months or so. And so we have been running the rule across the service, seeking to see how we would do once that inspection actually lands with us. And I think my answer would be, Leanne clearly may want to add something further to this, is that we have got very positive things that we can say around the service that we provide, but absolutely there is more that we need to do, and there are areas that we could improve upon. I think the leadership under Leanne and indeed Jackie Brown as the Assistant Director is absolutely phenomenal. I've got to say that the portfolio holder, Teresa Murray, has got a real ironclad grip on the service, got a clear line of sight into service. I think we have all the ingredients in place with the further funding that members agreed on the right sizing of adult social care. So all members agreed that we would make that additional investment into the service. We have proposals for the future around Care for Medway that was referenced in Vince's being held to account report. We have great desires around assistive technology to support people to live independently in their home using the technology that Andrew was talking about earlier on as well. So I do think we have a lot of reasons to be positive about the future. I do think we have delivered a good service over the years. I remember a number of assistant directors that we've had in place over the years, but I'm clear too there is more that we need to do, and I think that is probably my view, what inspectors would say to us when they arrive in Medway. Hope that's helpful, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Chair. My question is regards to on page 90 under the logical framework matrix 1.007. Leanne probably won't be surprised at this question, obviously being at corporate parenting. It's saying a figure by 2025, percentage of young people leaving care, 16 and 17-year-olds who are in education, employment or training is higher than 50%. I don't think we're being ambitious enough for our young children, especially when the figure of 18 plus is at 53% already. Our statistical neighbours at that age is at 60%. And also 16 and 17-year-olds being a legal requirement, and us being corporate parents being legally responsible for them, going at 50% is, I think we're selling them short. And I just wondered if that can be relooked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Joe. Richard, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mark, for your question. I think we probably could have predicted that you were going to say that, but can I also thank you for taking your corporate parenting responsibilities so seriously as well. So it is fair to say that we had a bit of a debate about this at corporate management team when we were setting this particular KPI. And for me, it's about getting the balance right between stretching but achievable as well. Now, of course, we want to aim high on all of these KPIs, and that was the figure that we landed on, given that kind of consideration. What I would say, and again, Chairman, Leanne may wish to come in. I do want this to be refreshed on an annual basis, so we're setting the council plan now. It does mark quite a shift, actually, in what we're doing, hence Andrew's question about the transition. I would like us to give this a shot and see where we are on this basis, but we can be reviewing it on an annual basis to see how we go forward. That would be my response. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. Leanne, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just building on that, it's similar to how I answered Councillor Cook's question. There are detailed plans under this. This isn't just it. We are striving every day to do better than this, but it's about incremental and proportionate at the minute. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo. Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the document. I always get a little bit worried when I see documents like this. You know, like the previous 2035 document. Now we've got the Medway one. You know, every few years we refresh another lovely colour brochure, comes out, and everybody says, "But this is what we want to achieve." And I'm not sure we'll ever go back to the 2035 and say, "Well, where have we got to do against that plan?" Other things that worry me is, you know, it's admirable to have one of the top priorities is living in good quality and affordable homes. We've got 112,000 homes in Medway. We can't influence the cost of those homes nationally, and in fact, if we do a good job, we're probably going to put the cost of those homes up because people want to come and live in Medway. So how can we really have one of our top priorities as something that we can't really influence? It doesn't quite sit well with me. The other thing, it mentions that you're planning to have an attractive tourist destination, but one of the first things we've done is plan to shut the TIC. How do you attract people in and have a good tourist, facility when we shut the Tourist Information Centre? Other things about celebrate individually the towns, their own individually things. The only festival that we cancelled is the one in Rainham. You know, it just doesn't seem as though we're saying words in the document of one thing, and actually by our actions doing other things, and it doesn't sit well with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hackwell. Richard, would you like to respond?
I would. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Gary, for your questions, because I know they are well meant and well intentioned, actually. So I would encourage you to be more positive around what we're going to do with this One Medway Council plan. Given the process that we followed, it wasn't just something that we just took out of the ether and then said, right, this is what we're going to do. And it is certainly not my intention that this is something that is then forgotten once it's been produced. This is absolutely something that will set the strategic direction for the council for the next 4 years. And on that basis, I will be expecting us to be delivering against it. And as Leanne has said, there are plans that underpin the priorities that are within here and the KPIs that sit underneath it. And actually, Gary, you know this from a previous role that you've had. So you will know that there is a lot of architecture that goes into, strategic architecture that goes into this. And certainly we as a corporate management team are absolutely committed to delivering against it. If I could just talk about the specific points, Chairman, if that's okay, that Gary's raised. Just in terms of the strategic priority there is around homes and housing. So I do understand the point around private ownership, that kind of thing. But of course, underneath that priority, it is about the local plan, so delivering a local plan. So clearly that is going to absolutely have an influence and an impact in terms of our homes and our housing. I do get the point that you raise around, but actually if Medway does really well, house prices are likely to rise. I'm afraid that probably will be a natural consequence, but actually I want people's earnings to rise as well. I want people to be having those good jobs that I referenced before. So under homes and housing, there's the local plan. Of course, we have our own council housing stock, 3,000 homes, and we have a new build programme that I'm really proud of, actually. I am very proud of it. So Centenary Gardens was a few years ago, but actually, if you think about Copenhagen Road, the new development there, Longfield Road in Rainham, so we do have a new build programme of council housing stock to help us take that forward. And of course, homes and housing plays into those wider determinants of health that Vince was talking about earlier, that we were discussing with health partners earlier on. So sorry to get a bit statty and geeky for a little while, but 80% of people's health and well-being is influenced by things that are beyond the kind of medical setting. They are about education. They are about having a decent job. They're about access to green spaces, the built environment, and having a decent home. So for me, this is a really important one, actually. And so, yes, we will be needing to work with partners, private sector developers. We are doing things where we work with landlords, that kind of thing. So I want us to do as much as we possibly can in that space. Tourism, so there are stats in the plan. You will have heard me talk about the kind of importance of tourism to Medway previously. £360 million to the local economy, 7,000 jobs, 5 million visits each year. Tourism is massively significant for Medway as a place. It was a really difficult decision around the Visitor Information Centre, and the team at the Visitor Information Centre do a fantastic job welcoming for our tourists. But we, in the financial situation that we found ourselves in, we knew we were going to have to take some difficult decisions. And actually some of the changing patterns around the way that tourists and visitors to areas find their information isn't always through that kind of face-to-face setting. I've got to be very clear, that was a really hard decision for me. All members know how much I love Medway's cultural offer. But unfortunately it was necessary given the financial position that we found ourselves in. And just the final point, if I can, Chairman, sorry if I'm talking too long now, celebrating the individual towns, that is a really, I know that I can speak to all of you members and you will absolutely be championing not only the 5 towns, but actually in the areas that you live as well. I had a very nice invitation earlier on to go and visit Hempstead and Wigmore. So I do think it is important that we maintain that ambition to celebrate our individual towns, but all of our places across Medway, because that's what makes us proud of our place. So unashamedly, Chairman, I'm having all of those things in this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I've got Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased with the title of the plan. For a start, One Medway. Richard will know that we have 20 years' experience in trying to be One Medway. And we made a good start. We're all here. That's the first thing. A lot of this hasn't changed. We're proud of the place. We're ambitious. And we do care. And I think we've heard that from all members on all sides here tonight. The need for collaboration is imperative. The one thing that I would say that we must do is we must live this. And I'd agree with you, Richard, we do need to talk the place up as much as we can. I'm a realist and sometimes I'm harsh on people. But if we can get these values, and we have a great opportunity, and we heard it from Samantha and we heard it from Zoe earlier, we've got a lot of new staff. I came here as a new manager, and you'll remember at Priestfields I stood up against somebody very, very powerful, and I said we would do something over a complaint that was made publicly with hundreds of people in the room, and we did that by lunchtime. So we have great people here. We have, and lots of the officers in this room were around at that time. So having a strong One Medway voice, living the values and behaviours, and I think that I would like to commend the plan on that. And I know that you guys are over the detail underneath it, and that's what your jobs are. And I'm really looking forward to actually a successful implementation of using the best of our people with the best of the technology that we can afford. Not necessarily we'll be able to have the top of the range stuff. We've always had to make a bit of compromise there. But the best that we can afford. People are using technology in their day-to-day lives. Most of us couldn't live without that piece of plastic or whatever it is, and bits and pieces. So I would like to commend this to the committee and celebrate where we're going with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Lula Printer.
Thank you, Chair. I want to say I'm feeling positive reading this. Like Councillor Cook, I thought it was a great read, lots of information, and anyone who reads it will learn a lot more about Medway than they knew before. And I think after the term, we'll all, as your enthusiasm, Richard, we'll all see that Medway is better. It's good and it can be better, and it will always improve every time anyway. I'm pleased that you said that you were going to review the KPIs annually so that we can keep monitoring them, because things do change and circumstances change. So that was a positive. I'm feeling positive about it. And I just wanted to say, Councillor Hackwell, you mentioned the Rainham Festival that no longer occurs, but Like in the previous administration, we lost Park Life in Gillingham. We also lost the Will Adams Festival. And just like the Rainham one, I'm pretty sure there were valid and legitimate reasons for those not being taking place at the moment, especially with our funding restrictions that we have. That's all. I'm feeling positive. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair, do you have a recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendations 1.1 and 1.2 at page 41.
Is that seconded? Councillor Cook. Is that agreed? That brings us on to agenda item 8, the revised advertising and sponsorship policy. I ask Celia Glenn-Williams, Head of Communication and Marketing, to introduce the report.
Good evening, everybody, and I'd just like to also introduce Scott Elliott, who's the Head of Health and Wellbeing Services, who's also here for any sort of particularly technical questions that might arise this evening as well. I'm pleased to be bringing forward to you this amendment to the advertising and sponsorship policy that was agreed back in 2018, actually. And it sets out the Council's approach to seeking and taking sponsorship and advertising. It's kind of recognised that it's a great thing for us to be doing. It helps the Council achieve its own corporate objectives. It helps us financially as well. And, you know, helps us also in building the Council's own reputation. But it also puts a bit of a framework and protection around us to protect our reputation and to ensure that we're doing things by the law and actually sort of in line with sort of, if you like, current trends and developments. We and many other councils also have very similar policies in place as well, so we do keep an eye on what's happening out there. As the paper explains, we're seeking to introduce a small number of amendments to the current policy that kind of really bring us in line more with our own sort of developments that have been happening within the council over the last few years. And it's in particular in two principal areas. One is our health and wellbeing agenda, and the other one is in climate response. And as we've been hearing tonight with the proposal and priorities and principles for the new corporate plan, Modern Medway Council plan, you know, these are sort of areas that are, you know, very, very important priorities for us. So taking the two items one by one, the tackling obesity and keeping people in Medway, you know, or helping people in Medway to lead healthy, long lives, you know, is one of our key priorities. The paper sets out some of the challenges that we already face in Medway, particularly in the areas of obesity, and it's one of the sort of the main challenges, if you like, that's being tackled by our you know, excellent public health team day in, day out at the moment as well. So what's proposed, you know, in this particular amendment is to bring in additional restrictions around the advertising of foods and products and services that are high in fats, salt and sugar. This is sort of, this is not something that's just new to Medway. It's actually something that we're seeing being implemented in a number of councils, and with the one sort of very strong example being Transport for London, that introduced a policy several years ago, and extremely successfully as well. I think, you know, any of us know that if you're out and about and you see advertising for, whether it's for burgers or for chocolate or whatever, these are highly influential in people's decision making when they go to the supermarket or when they go out to eat. So I think it is important if they're sort of seeing these sort of being served to them on social media, for example, as well. So they do influence people's advertising, their own sort of food choices when they're out and about. The proposed amendments, however, is not to ban all, you know, advertising, if you like, by the businesses, those particular brands. What we're doing is we're asking them to swap out. So, for example, that if Asda wanted to take some advertising with us for one of their sort of ready meals that was very high in these products, then we just say to them, actually, you know, we'd like you to swap it out for a more healthy alternative. And the same goes for some of the fast food retailers as well. Transport for London, just to come back to them, I mean, obviously, you know, we're sort of looking at the financial impact, you know, of Transport for London when they particularly introduced it. Rather than decrease their revenue, actually in the in the first quarter following the implementation of that, their revenue went up by £1 million, and 3 years in, the advertising is still very strong, very strong on Transport for London. The same advertisers still with them, but they've actually just been swapping it out as well. And the commercial media increase in just the first year following the implementation was an increase of £2.3 million. We're obviously not in the same league as Transport for London, I have to say, but we would hope that actually, many of the advertisers who advertise with us will also be taking advertising also on Transport for London assets, and they're well used to these sort of measures now as it is. The second area is to do with our climate agenda. As you know, we introduced our own climate emergency again back in 2019 with the drive to reduce the carbon footprint both of Medway Council but also across Medway as a whole. The proposal here is to restrict advertising and sponsorship by businesses or services who again are involved with the high carbon producing products and services, with a view overall to try and reduce local demand for such products as well. And also it shows that we are taking the lead as a council here in influencing those decisions that might be taken by other people across Medway as well. So again, we're not sort of saying there's a blanket ban, but let's say, for example, if there was a car retailer that wanted to advertise with us, we would be saying that the brand, if they had a range of cars, we'd be saying actually, well, you can't advertise your brand as such, but actually you could advertise your electric cars going forward with us in future. So we're trying to find sort of helpful alternatives. There are other sort of minor amends that have come in as part of this paper as well. Not a huge amount, but we hope that this is sort of bringing our own policies in line with the council's own priorities at the moment. So that is why we're proposing these amendments that come before you this evening.
Thank you, Celia. Do I have any member? Councillor Printer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Celia. It was just, I totally agree with the swap out for the healthier alternatives. I'm just wondering if TfL is a valid comparison for Medway Council. Was there no other council of our size that does the same thing that we could be compared and more evenly matched, considering the number of visitors, residents in London compared to us that may also... is there a council in London, for example?
There are, Southwark Council, for example, is another one, and they introduced it very, very seamlessly into their advertising, several years ago as well. So, but I don't know if Scott wants to come in as well with some of the other examples that you've looked at too.
Yeah, Bristol, Brighton, Merton. There's at least 10 councils now that have adopted it. Sustain have been working around all the councils and giving them the advice saying this policy works, it's implementable, it's practical, it's not, overly draconian. It's not, you can implement it. So Brighton was the most recent one in the southeast. So we were close to being the first in the southeast to have it done, but Brighton just pipped us to that.
So they didn't receive any sort of cut in the income they take.
Theirs is very newly implemented, but no council has reported any cuts in revenue. The biggest difference between us is we don't generate a lot of income comparable to TfL. So actually, the risk to TfL was huge because their revenue is massive. Ours is negligible comparable to. So I take your point, but it's the same impact. Obviously, it's just the scale of it, isn't it?
Yeah, the only question was TfL was all that was used as an example, and I wondered if there was another local authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prender. Thank you for your answer. Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Celia. I agree with the food one. I've got a problem with that. I'm a bit concerned about the low carbon emissions in the fact that we as a society are going through a very slow transition from ICE engines to EVs. I read in the report that only 2 other councils have adopted this policy. I think we may be going a bit earlier. We have to think about, car companies or car sales, local car sales businesses. They sell all ranges of vehicles. They sell EVs, hybrids, ICE vehicles. They would be, I can just imagine one of those companies putting their sponsorship on the back of the Medway Mile shirt, for example. I think if we go too early, we're a bit restricted. I think we also got to think about, how far-reaching is that? Can we ban a car sales company, but not a Arriva, who are probably, the biggest polluter in Medway towns with their diesel buses, or my friend would tell me. So I am a bit concerned that it's a bit too early to go for the low emissions yet. I think that we should, in my personal view, is we should go for the food, but leave the emissions out for another year or so and review it in a year or so.
Thank you, Councillor Hagler. Celia, would you like to respond?
Yeah, you are. You're absolutely right. It does feel quite a brave move to do this, but I think if we are also wanting to be completely committed to our own climate agenda, I think we should be sort of, if you like, leading the way in this particular area. I mean, I think it's one of the things that we do get scrutinised on in terms of when people are looking at how we're doing it in our own climate agenda. And, this is sort of one of the areas where there are very few councils who are actually sort of putting their money where their mouth is. They're declaring climate emergencies, but they're not actually sort of seeing it through in the whole range of activities that they do. In terms of things like Arriva, or sort of, if you like, sort of say about, I don't know, Medway Mile T-shirts, I mean, we would just need to be very, very careful about, which sponsor or which advertiser we worked with. So, as I said, I mean, it doesn't mean that, let's say you couldn't work with, I don't know, if you take a local one, Barrett's of Canterbury, down there, you couldn't have the Barrett's name on there, but you could have, I don't know, BMW, electric BMW, one of the brands for that. So we're not saying you can't do it with the business. But I think, in the end of the day, it comes down to, what councillors feel about, I suppose, how bold we want to be in kind of really championing the climate agenda. We have, for example, we had one company who wants to advertise with us that manufacture plastic grass. Now, again, this is kind of not necessarily in keeping with the climate agenda. We might sort of say, actually, it's sort of, it's manufactured grass, it's sort of not sustainable. So, is that the kind of thing we want to be doing in the future? But I mean, obviously, we'll welcome your views if it's felt that we're taking that step too early. Then that's fine too.
Thank you, Celia. I have Councillor Jones, Councillor Lawrence, and then Councillor Ettridge. Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think we can be positive about this, and members who came onto the council in May 2023 took an induction programme, and one of the first things I went on was a marketplace event where I learnt about the work that communications were doing in conjunction with public health, promoting through first points of contact, pharmacies, etc., the message. And I think, we should be positive in a general sense about the work that's being done. I just wondered if the head of service had any comment about the value of electronic communications in terms of what we see on streets and pavements nowadays. More and more I'm walking around Chatham High Street down Chatham Hill, etc., and noticing that electronic messages are being flashed up in front of me. There's one board next to Luton Arches. I wondered whether the communications head would comment on whether it's thought that these were valuable in any way, whether drivers driving past them absorbed the information that was on them. I know Kent County Council used this method to advertise for adult social workers, for instance. I just wondered if we had any thoughts as to the value of these forms of communications. And no, Chair, this is not a plea for the electronic billboard to appear back on the waterfront near the library in Chatham, as we had once before. That has now gone and housing has been built on that site. But I wondered, in terms of how things have progressed with electronic communications of this sort, roadside, whether the head of communications had any thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we do use digital communications an enormous amount, and we've been increasing it, whether it's sort of through our own social media channels, through digital newsletters, and through a range of other sort of activities that we do. The digital billboards, we don't have a huge number of them in Medway. I mean, if you go up to London, you sort of see them all over the place. We do have a digital totem just outside the station in Rochester that we did invest in some few years ago. And yes, I mean, yes, they work. I mean, I think they work very effectively, but we've also got to count. I mean, obviously they also contribute to the carbon footprint as well. So at the moment, we haven't invested any further in them, in particularly in Medway. They can be useful, but there's I think there's sort of one in just a very wide range of tools that you can use to reach different people.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Hackwell on the food item. I think it makes sense. Albeit for that to be really effective, we really need supermarkets to stop stocking those high sugary foods, don't we? Anything we do is going to be touching around the edges. The one area I disagree with is the low carbon one. Every product made in China is made from electricity that comes from coal-fired power stations. So the logic of your restriction is to go to that degree. Okay. The other thing is I know you do some marvellous work on tourism. So are we going to stop advertising Medway to overseas customers because they all come here on aeroplanes? So I do think that particular one is a bit odd, and I agree with Councillor Hackwell that we should park that one, but definitely agree with on the food one.
Yes, on the tourism element, just definitely hadn't stopped that, but they arrive in all sorts of different ways, and several on coaches actually as well into Medway. But we also, obviously we want to still see people coming into to Medway. I mean, it's very much sort of obviously with councillors to decide. I mean, I just come back to my, I suppose my earlier point, which is actually, do we want to be seen to be kind of market leaders on this? There is a catch-all in here that sort of says, that in conjunction or in discussion with the portfolio holder, it is, it can be at their discretion if you want to make an exception in that particular area. But it would be one thing that we'd have to sort of go in and test.
Thank you, Celia. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, just want to say about the food stuff. Thanks for the words of support there. Just some new data, actually. We have the lowest 5-a-day levels, for example, is 24.9% for adults in Medway. So we have less than 25% of adults consuming 5 a day. Most recent data published. So the policy that we're looking for is to kind of normalise healthy food. That's effectively what it's about. It's not about taking anything away. But just in terms of your point around ASDA, what this will do, and similar for the climate change agenda as well, we can now say, like Richard says, this is our values, we're walking it, we're talking it. We can then go to other advertisers, British Transport, other food vendor advertising and say, we've done this, will you follow us? So this really will have a small impact, but the ripple effect is potentially huge. So it's a kind of marker in the sand as much as anything else.
Thank you. Councillor Ettridge.
Thank you, and thank you for your report. I'm not going to read it out because members can read it for themselves, but it's on 3.10, the very first couple of lines there, the first sentence. I'm just wondering if you think there's a contradiction in terms here of where Medway Council are promoting its residents to use public transport, primarily Arriva, when we all know, as elected members and officers sitting here tonight, that Arriva in Medway are the worst polluting buses in the country. Basically, they're sent here from every other authority that refuses to have them because they're so polluting.
Thank you. Celia, would you like to respond?
Apologies. Are you sort of saying that we shouldn't be promoting Arriva, or are you just saying, sorry?
I think if we're going to promote public transport, then we need to ensure that our public transport is the best it possibly could be and not accept everybody else's rejects.
Well, I think that's...
Celia, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think this is an issue that probably needs to be raised with the Deputy Director of Place, and I'll feed that back to her.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Celia, for the report. I think we've done exactly what we said we weren't going to do, which was to turn sort of a positive aspiration, but we're using negative language. And I know we're talking about restrictions here, but maybe what we should consider doing, and I'm not telling you how to suck eggs here, sorry. I have no background in marketing. In fact, I think I failed my first attempt when I did my MBA. But anyway, when we talk about this, maybe what we should be saying is we're only promoting lower carbon or positive climate, well, lower carbon, rather than restricting high carbon usage. Because there is a valid point about stuff is made in China is but it's made by the time it's arrived here. And it has polluted the earth, but we can't help that because people buy it all the time. But my suggestion may be, instead of us talking about restrictions here, it might help you in selling advertising, because by and large that's what we're talking about doing, is that we have a positive approach to carbon neutral or lower carbon products. And so please, if you want to come to us with your lower carbon products, we've got a very good offer for you. And maybe that's how the committee might favour this a bit better.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Celia, would you like to respond?
Yes, I think that's a fantastic idea, and you're very welcome to come and join the communications team at any time. No, I mean, I think the reason it's been sort of phrased in this way is because the policy sets out to sort of, I suppose, to sort of say the areas where we will not be able to take advertising from. That's kind of, I think, how that's phrased. But I completely agree that when it comes to us then going out and actually seeking advertising or seeking any sponsorship opportunities, we would phrase that in a very much more positive light than that. So we won't be going out and saying, well, we won't take you and we won't take you. But actually, we would be going out to say we are actively seeking. We want to work very closely with, in partnership with, these sorts of businesses. You're absolutely right, and we would do that.
Thank you, Celia. I don't have any other member. Vice Chair, do you have a recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation 1.1 at page 107.
Is that seconded? Sorry, Councillor Lawrence?
I was quite unsure about actually what the recommendation was, because it seeks members' opinion on whether we should stop advertising on two issues, which is one is on food and one is on high carbon. I thought there was a choice there in what officers were, or are we only being given a binary choice, which is we accept it or we don't accept it?
So the committee is being asked essentially for comments. So we will, I'll write that up and we will pass those comments that the committee has made on to Cabinet, who will consider the issue further.
Well, I think we need to express that in terms of I think there's consensus around the table on the food issue, but I don't think there's entirely 100% consensus on the carbon issue.
I agree. Steve, can you come up with some wording to encapsulate that?
We can just vote. We just vote on the two issues. I mean,
sorry, Councillor.
I'm happy to second the Vice Chair's original recommendation.
Thank you. Okay. Look, we have a recommendation. It's been seconded. Is that agreed? Okay. Who's in favor of the recommendation by show of hands? Who's against? The recommendations pass. Okay. That brings us on to agenda item 9, Council Plan Performance Monitoring Report and Strategic Risk Summary, Quarter 3, 2023/2024. Excuse me, Councillor Lawrence. Thank you. I ask Sam Beck-Farley, Chief Organizational Culture Officer, to introduce the report. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. This report you'll be familiar with. This report summarises the performance for Quarter 3. The programmes that fall under the remit of this committee is climate change and Medway, a great place to live, work, learn and visit. Whilst there's no performance measures for these priorities, you have a narrative update which you can find at Appendix 1, which also includes a narrative against the two values that fall under the remit of this committee of financial resilience and child-friendly. The report also presents the Quarter 3 review of strategic risks. That can be found at Appendix 2. There were no changes to the risk scores for this quarter. Committee are reminded that Cabinet received this report on the 13th of February. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Any member? Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendations 1.1 at page 129.
Is that seconded? Councillor MacDonald. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. That brings us on to agenda item 10, the Capital Budget Monitoring Round 3, 2023-2024. I'll ask Phil Watts, Chief Operating Officer, to introduce the report. Phil.
Thank you, Chair. So this report details the results of the third round of capital monitoring relating to the schemes within the remit of this committee. It was presented to Cabinet on the 13th of February and has been considered by both the Corporate Management Team and Directorate Management Teams. Section 5 contains information for all directorates for context, so you can see the overall programme. Table 1, Section 5.1 details the financial summary for the capital programme, and Table 2 details the associated funding. The result of the third round of monitoring represents a projected underspend of £32 million across the council, but none of that relates to the schemes within the remit of this committee. Further detail on the schemes within the remit of business support and digital are in section 6 on pages 159 and 160. And the risks to the capital programme are outlined at section 9 on the report. I'll try and answer any questions that members might have.
Thank you, Phil. Any member? Councillor Lawrence.
Just for my education, really, the 32 million underspend in regen, it seems to be an item that appears every committee meeting. Is that money, I'm just trying to understand what is that real money or is it some sort of technical money? Does it, having that 32 million in the budget, prevent us borrowing other monies to spend on other corporate priorities? And is there a plan, if we're not going to spend that money, to release it back to wherever it came from, so that we could then go, we can now spend 10 million. Actually, we might need to spend another 15 million dealing with next year's budget. Sorry, thank you.
Phil.
So what that budget represents is borrowing approval that was granted when those schemes were approved as part of the capital programme. We've decided in terms of that scheme to take a pause. Is the language we're using. And until we've done a kind of options analysis and development appraisal for that scheme, we're not going to be spending any of that borrowing. Now, I haven't drawn that borrowing down. I will borrow it down at a point when we choose to spend it. But I think it's premature to take it out of the capital programme because a plan might come forward for the future of that site that'll require borrowing approvals. But what I would say is that any decision to change the plan for that site would represent a key decision, and it would need to come back to Cabinet and I would say probably Council as well.
So just answering my question, in terms of that money's been allocated but not spent and not drawn down, I understand that. But does that affect our overall ability to borrow more money? Because there's a ceiling, isn't there? And I think based on the SIPFA report and the 15 million we've had to borrow to plug the gap, we're about 80% now of our borrow. So what I'm saying is, if something fantastic came forward and you needed to find another 20, 25 million for that scheme, for example, buying 150 houses for temporary accommodation, for example, are we going to be hamstrung by that 32 million?
I understand the question. So what that represents is approval to take forward a capital scheme, and that scheme would be funded by borrowing if it was taken forward. What you're talking about is the headroom against the capital financing requirement. Yeah. Now, the way the capital financing requirement works and our headroom against it, if we incur expenditure on capital and we fund that from borrowing, Obviously, our borrowing goes up, but so too does the capital financing requirement. So that headroom would theoretically be maintained. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you, Phil. Councillor Joy.
Just asking a question from a comment you made that was is lined up for a particular site. Are you able to say what site that is? Because
Yeah, I mean, the site I'm talking to and talking about is the innovation site. Innovation Park Medway site.
Thank you. Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. Phil, just a question really. As the 141 officer, 151, sorry. Sorry. Yeah.
you've been demoted.
We say in 7.3 that you're £5.5 million below your comfortable reserve. How low do we have to go before you actually activate a problem? Because you're already below your sort of line in the sand. I want to know where the second line in the sand is really.
Would you like to respond, Phil?
This is a question around the revenue report, isn't it? Yeah. Do you want to park that one and we deal with it next time? Yeah, okay.
I don't have any member wishing to ask any question, so over to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendations 1.1 and 1.2 at 1.57.
Is that seconded? Councillor Joy. Is that agreed? Okay, that brings us on to agenda item 11, the Revenue Budget Monitoring 2023-2024 Round 3. I ask Phil Works, again, Chief Operating Officer, to introduce the report. Phil.
Thank you, Chair. So this is obviously, again, the Round 3 monitoring for the revenue budget. The report was presented to Cabinet on the 13th of February and summarises the position for the third round of monitoring for 23-24 financial year. It projects an overspend at that stage of £11.4 million across the council. What that means, and this will point to your question, Gary, is that we only have £15.8 million in non-earmarked general reserves at the moment as a result of the declassification of those earmarked reserves that we had, that we referenced in the budget report. And if we were to outturn at 11.4 million as predicted at round 3, that would leave us with £5.7 million of earmark, 4.5 million of non-earmarked reserves, which would be below the minimum level set by myself. But I would stress it is a forecast at this stage. And obviously, we're in the new financial year now, but at the time these projections were made, we weren't, and the management team was actively working to reduce that overspend. So that's my introduction.
I still think that the question is, where is your second line in the sand? Because you've all...
So I suppose there's a couple of things to say here. When I took on the role as Section 151 officer, and it was about 9 years ago now, our general reserve balances at that point were at below that, and they were at about £5 million. So the 10 million, I'm not going to pretend there was any science in it. And it goes to the point we're talking about with the performance. I had to set myself an achievable target. And so it was a fairly arbitrary, I want to get my general reserves to 10 million. At that time, it represented about 5%. It probably doesn't anymore. And I think as part of a medium-term financial strategy going forward. The organisation probably needs to set itself a minimum balance that it aspires to and come up with a medium-term plan to achieve that. But for some years now, I have just been getting over the line year on year because we've had one-year settlements from government. That kind of forward planning has just been impossible. So that's the answer to the first bit. The 10 million is a bit arbitrary. The sad thing is we did achieve it at one point and beyond. And there was a point in time, a couple of years ago, we had £26 million as non-earmarked reserves. But because of underfunding, not keeping up with the demographic pressures and the pressures on statutory services that we've been confronted with, as an organisation, we've had to eat into those reserves again. So, no, I'm not happy that we're falling below the 10 million. In fact, I wasn't very happy that we dropped below the 26 million that we'd built up. But we are where we are. We've now got a plan to get through the budget for next year, and it's meant that I think this is possibly one of the most robust budgets we've set for a few years. And I can say that because we haven't made perhaps riskier decisions around the budget build. What we've done is say, well, this is what we need to spend, and we'll borrow the £14 million to make sure that we can deliver that. So I'm quite confident that as an organisation we should be able to spend within the budget that we've set ourselves, but it's not sustainable because I can't borrow £14 million every year. And that's the challenge for us as an organisation now, is that over the medium term we've got to get to a place where we've made the decisions as an organisation around our expenditure so that we can contain annual spend within the funds that we've got available to us. But I think your question is a really, really good one. As an organisation, we need to think what is an appropriate minimum level of reserves that we aspire to, and we need to build a medium-term financial plan that seeks to achieve that.
Thank you. I don't have any other member. Do we have any other recommendation?
A quick question. The ever-increasing overspending legal, so it's gone another 61,000 out, despite the actions taken at full council not long ago, plus the reduction in the number of locums, which I think we noted from Zoe's report. Are we going to get to a point where legal can sort of stay in budget?
That's probably a question that we could do with the monitoring officer here to answer. But what I would say is that the measures that were taken to increase the size of the legal services team, to put them in the first phase of Medpay review so that we're paying them at the appropriate level, so that we can then recruit staff substantively, reduce the call. That does take time to turn that around. We can create a structure and we can set the salary at the right level, but if the people aren't out there, that still means it's difficult to recruit to that structure. But I think Bhupinder is confident that he'll get there. Alongside that, part of the pressure and the reason we had to grow that legal team in the first place is because of the issues with children's services and the throughput of work through that. Now, children's services are coming out at the end of the other side of an improvement journey. And if Leanne were here, she would say she's confident that we're going to get on top of that caseload and that demand will come down. So I think it's a kind of, we've taken all the steps necessary to bring that budget back under control, but it's going to take a little bit of time.
Thank you, Phil. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendations 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3 at page 163.
Is that seconded? Councillor Printer. Is that agreed? Thank you. That brings us on to agenda item 9, the work programme. I ask Steve Dickens, Democratic Services Officer, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Just one thing to note for the work programme. we have the local plan coming to the committee in June. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any member? Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendations 1.1 and 1.2 at page 171.
Is that seconded? Councillor Joy. Is that agreed? Thank you, members. That brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you. Thank you.
you.